ruby wash. The first one we found had been opened up along the belly in a straight line, edge to edge, the way you'd unzip a duffel bag, and there wasn't any blood on the ground under her. That was the part I kept coming back to that first morning, standing there with my breath smoking in the cold and the dogs hanging back by the truck, which they never did. Not the cut, the dry dirt. I want to tell it the way it happened, in order, because the order is the only thing about it that still makes sense to me, and because if I skip ahead you won't understand why I did the things I did, or didn't do the things I should have. I run cattle on the high ground east of Ruby Wash, out past the Nez place, where the county pavement gives up and turns to 2 ruts and a cattle guard that rattles your teeth. My father ran cattle there before me, and his father before him, and there is a photograph on the kitchen wall from 1951 of my grandfather, standing next to a Hereford bull with his hat pushed back, squinting like the sun owed him money. We are not folks who spook. I need you to take that as a fact and not as a man bragging, because everything that comes after depends on it. My name is Wade Coombs. I was 44 years old that winter, which was the winter of 2022, going into 2023, and I had spent the better part of the previous 3 years learning that a man can work 16 hours a day and still watch the ground go out from under him $1 at a time. My father had a stroke in the spring of 2019, and after that the running of the place fell to me all at once, the way a roof falls, not board by board, but the whole thing on your head in one afternoon. He was still alive, up in the assisted place in Farmington, in a room that smelled like powdered eggs and floor cleaner. I drove up to see him every other Sunday. He knew me maybe half those times. The other half he called me by his brother's name, a man who'd been dead since Korea, and I let him, because correcting him was a cruelty I didn't have the stomach for. We were carrying a note on the north pasture, and another on the equipment, and the price of hay had gone stupid, and my wife Dina had taken a part-time job doing intake at the clinic in town 3 days a week just to keep the lights honest. She never once threw it in my face. That was almost worse. She'd come home smelling like hand sanitizer and sit at the table and add up the month in a spiral notebook she kept in the junk drawer, and I'd watch her mouth move a little while she did it, and I'd think, I am going to fix this. I don't know how yet, but I am going to fix this. We didn't have kids. We tried for a stretch of years and then stopped talking about it, which is its own kind of grief, the kind that doesn't come with a casserole. What we had instead was the ranch, and each other, and 2 dogs, a blue heeler named Pete, and an old yellow mutt named Sugar, who'd showed up at the gate one winter and never left. I had one hand that season, a kid named Marcus So, who was 19 and worked hard and didn't talk much, which suited me fine. He wasn't full Dene. His mother was Anglo, but he'd grown up on the checkerboard land where the reservation and the fee land lie against each other like 2 decks of cards shuffled halfway, and he knew things about that country that I didn't, and had the good sense not to make a show of it. He drove out 3 mornings a week from his grandmother's place near the chapter house. Some of what happened because of what Marcus wouldn't say, and I don't hold it against him. He was a kid, he was scared. So was I, at the end. I just didn't have the excuse of knowing better. Our nearest neighbor to the west was Leonard Nez, who I'd guessed was somewhere north of 80, and who ran a few sheep and a garden he watered by hand out of a cistern. His place sat maybe 1.5 miles off, at the foot of the mesa, and on a clear night I could see the one bare bulb over his door from my own porch. A little yellow point of light hung out in all that dark. Leonard and my father had known each other 60 years. When I was a boy, he'd give me hard candy out of his shirt pocket, the kind that comes wrapped in cellophane with a strawberry printed on it, and he'd talk to my father in a low voice in 2 languages, while I sucked on the candy and watched the sheep. He was a quiet man and a kind one, and I had let our friendship thin out to a wave across the fence line, like you do when you're busy and think you have all the time in the world. That's the whole cast of it. A tired rancher, his patient wife, a quiet kid, an old man, 2 dogs, and a lot of cold ground under a sky so big it makes you feel like a beetle on a plate. Hold on to them. By the end I couldn't hold on to all of them myself. The country out there is high desert, better than 6,000 feet, and it does not forgive. Sagebrush and rabbitbrush and juniper on the higher ground, and down in the wash is a little cottonwood where the water runs in the spring. The wind comes across it with nothing to slow it down, so that in the winter it finds every gap in your coat and every crack in your house and gets in and sits there with you. The mesa stands up to the north, a long red wall going blue at the top, and there are places up on it and back in the folds of it where I have never set foot and never wanted to. My father used to say there were parts of that country older than the idea of people, and that the smart thing was to tend to your own quarter section and leave the rest alone. And I thought that was just an old man's talk. I don't think that anymore. We'd been having a hard, dry cold that December, the kind with no snow in it, which is the worst kind for grass, but the best kind for finding tracks. I found the first heifer on a Tuesday morning, the 6th of December, out along the fence in the northeast corner, where the ground rises toward the mesa. I had gone out to check water because the float valve on the north tank had been sticking and I didn't like the look of the ice on it. I had Pete and Sugar in the bed of the truck and the 30-06 behind the seat, because we'd lost a calf to something in the fall, and I figured it for coyotes or maybe a lion come down off the high ground, and I had taken to carrying the rifle out of habit. She was one of my better heifers, a young red cow, not 2 years old, lying on her side maybe 40 feet off the fence. From the truck I took her for down and calving trouble, even though it was the wrong season, and I got out swearing under my breath and started toward her, and that was when the dogs wouldn't come. Pete was a dog that had never in his life refused a thing. I asked him. He'd go into a badger hole after a badger if I pointed at it, but when I whistled him down off the truck, he stood in the bed with his feet planted and his hackles up in a ridge from his shoulders to his tail, and he made a sound I'd never heard out of him. A low, steady thing way down in his chest, and he would not come. Sugar, the old dog, had gotten down into the floor of the truck bed and pressed herself flat against the cab. I stood there in the cold, with my hand still up in the whistling shape, and I looked from the dogs to the heifer and back, and something in the day tipped a few degrees off level, and I couldn't have told you why. I went to her alone. She was opened up along the belly, like I said, one long clean cut from the brisket back, and the edges of it were dry, not clotted. Dry, like the cut had happened days ago, except she'd been alive and on her feet the evening before. I'd seen her myself at the evening feed. There was no blood on the ground. I want to be careful here because I've told this part to men who raise cattle, and I've watched their faces go careful and polite, the way a face goes when a man has decided you're either lying or you saw wrong. So, let me just say it plain. A cow has a lot of blood in her. When you open one up, the ground knows about it. That ground didn't know about it. The dirt under her was the same pale, dry dirt as everywhere else, cold and undisturbed, and she lay on top of it like she'd been set down there, arranged, and the only tracks anywhere near her were mine coming in. Her eye was open, and there was frost on it. I stood over her a long time. I'm not a man who scares, and I've told you that, but I'll tell you, I felt the cold get into me in a new way standing there, and the back of my neck drew up tight, and I had the sudden clear thought, with no reason attached to it, that I should not be squatting down with my back to the sagebrush. I stood up, I turned around. There was nothing behind me but the fence and the rise and the mesa going blue in the early light, and a long way off. 3 ravens sitting on 3 fence posts in a row, not moving. All of them faced the same way, faced at me. I told myself it was a lion. A lion will cover a kill, I know that, but a lion will also feed on it, and nothing had fed on her. Coyotes, then, some sickness, some accident with the wire. I told myself a string of reasonable things all the way back to the truck, and I got the dogs settled, and I drove back to the house to get the tractor and a chain so I could drag her off before she drew every scavenger in the county. That's what a rancher does. You lose stock, it's a bad day, you clean it up, and you go on. I didn't call anybody. Who would I have called? Dina asked me at supper why I was quiet, and I told her about the heifer, just the facts of it, down and dead, a bad cut, probably a lion. I left out the dry ground and the dogs and the ravens. I don't know why I left them out. Maybe because saying them out loud would have made them into something, and I wasn't ready for them to be something yet. She reached over and put her hand on my wrist and said we'd make it up somewhere, and I said sure we would. And outside the wind came up and worked at the corner of the house, and far off one of the dogs started barking at the dark and then stopped all at once, like a hand had been laid over its mouth. The second one was nearly 2 weeks later. I'd half talked myself back into ordinary life by then. We'd had a little snow, a skiff of it that came in the night and went by noon, and the ranch had given me the mercy of a run of dull days, fixing the float valve, hauling hay, driving up to see my father, who had called me by my dead uncle's name, and cried a little when I left, which he'd never done before. I came back down the mountain that Sunday, tired all the way to the bone, and slept 10 hours, and woke to Marcus knocking on the door before it was full light. He didn't say anything. That was the thing about Marcus. He didn't waste words, and when I opened the door and saw his face, I knew it was bad before he got a word out. He just tipped his head toward his own truck, and I put my boots on and went. This one was up along the wash, in the stand of cottonwood where the cattle like to shelter out of the wind. It was a steer this time, one of the bigger ones, and it was up in the fork of a cottonwood tree, maybe 9 feet off the ground. I need you to sit with that for a second, the way I had to sit with it. A steer will run 600-700 pounds. It was wedged in the crotch of the tree where the trunk split, folded over the fork with its legs hanging down on both sides, and its head was turned all the way around backward, so it was looking out over its own spine, back down the wash, back the way we'd come. There was no way to put it up there. There is no machine on my place that puts a 700-pound animal 9 feet up a cottonwood, and if there were, the ground under the tree would be torn to hell, and it wasn't. It was smooth. It was smoother than the ground had any right to be, like something had dragged a broom over it. Marcus stood back at the edge of the trees with his hands in his coat pockets, and he would not come in under the branches. I looked at him, and he looked at the steer, and then he looked at me, and he said one thing. He said, "We should go. We can't just leave it," I said. "Yes, we can," he said. He wasn't arguing. There wasn't any heat in it. He said it the way you'd tell a man to step back from an edge, flat and careful, like the wrong volume might bring something down. "We should go, and we should go now, and you shouldn't be looking at it that long." I was looking at the steer's face. Its eyes were dry and dull, and there was that same frost on them, and its tongue was out, and I was thinking that the neck was wrong, that a neck doesn't turn that far, that the whole animal was arranged the way a child arranges a toy. It doesn't understand yet, roughly, approximately, a thing made by something that had seen a steer but had never been one. I made myself stop looking. I made myself turn around. My legs had already started walking before I decided to, and I didn't like how much I wanted to run. We got in Marcus's truck. He drove out too fast for the ground, and I didn't tell him to slow down. Halfway back to the house, he said, without looking at me, "You need to talk to somebody who knows about this." "About cattle mutilation," I said. "I'd read about it. Every rancher out here has heard about it. It goes around every 10 or 15 years. The helicopters, the government theories, the lights in the sky, and there's always some man with a website." "You think it's that? Some nut with a helicopter?" "No," Marcus said. And then he wouldn't say anything else, no matter how I came at it, and by the time we got back to the house his jaw was set and his hands were tight on the wheel, and I understood that whatever he wasn't saying, he'd been raised to not say it, and that pushing him was going to cost me the one thing I had going for me out there, which was a hand I could trust. So I let it lie. I have thought 1,000 times since about what would have changed if I hadn't let it lie. Probably nothing. That's what I tell myself. Probably nothing. I called the sheriff's office that afternoon, more to have done something than because I thought they'd help. A deputy came out the next day, a heavy-set young man named Ordonez, who I could tell wanted to be somewhere warm, and he looked at the steer in the tree for about 90 seconds and got quiet, the same as Marcus had. He took some pictures on his phone. He asked me if I had had trouble with anybody, if I'd fired a hand or crossed a neighbor, and I said no. He asked if it could be some kind of prank, kids, and I asked him what kind of kids put 700 pounds up a tree without leaving a track, and he didn't have an answer for that. Before he left, he stood by his cruiser with the door open, and he looked out at the mesa for a second, and he said, You know old Nez down the road, the Navajo fella? I said I did. He said, might not be the worst idea to go say hello. Then he got in and drove off, and I never heard another word from that office about it. That was 2 men in one day telling me to go talk to somebody. I want it on the record that I was told. I want it clear that the knowledge was set right in front of me, and I stepped around it because I was tired, and because I had a note due in January, and because the part of my mind that keeps a wrench running had already filed the whole thing under bad luck and moved on to the float valve. And a man will believe almost anything before he'll believe the thing that costs him his footing in the world. I didn't go see Leonard Nez. Not then. That was the first real mistake, and I made it out of nothing worse than being busy. The dying eased off for a while after that, and if the whole thing had ended there, I'd have spent the rest of my life telling it as the strangest week I ever had and left it at that. But it didn't end. It only changed. It stopped being about the cattle, and it started being about the house and the yard and the closeness of things. Looking back, I think the cattle were only ever the announcement of it, the way a man clears his throat before he starts to talk. The next thing was the coyotes, or the thing that came in the shape of a coyote, and it started so small that I argued myself out of it 3 separate times before I couldn't anymore. We'd always had coyotes. You raise stock out there, you know coyotes the way you know weather. In the evenings, they sing up on the flats, that yipping call that rises and breaks apart, and I'd lived with it so long I mostly didn't hear it, the way you don't hear a clock until it stops. But that January the singing changed. It started coming from closer in, first from the fence line, then from the yard, and it started answering itself wrong. I know how that sounds. Let me try to be exact. A pack of coyotes calling to each other has a shape to it. Calls and answers spread out across the country, and your ear learns that shape without you ever deciding to. What came into the yard that January had the shape of it, but the timing was off? A call would go up out by the corral, and an answer would come back from the woodpile not 15 feet from the house. And then the first voice would answer the answer, so that it sounded like 2 coyotes having a conversation, except no coyote paces a conversation like that. It was too even. It had the rhythm of 2 men talking, that back and forth, and once I'd heard it that way I could not unhear it. And I lay in bed with Dina asleep beside me, and listened to 2 coyotes that weren't coyotes talk to each other in the dark right outside the wall, and I felt the sweat come up cold on me, even under the blankets. Pete wouldn't go out, that's the other thing. A healer is a dog that wants to work, that wants to go put himself between you and whatever's out there, and Pete had taken to lying pressed against the back door with his ears down, and when the calling started in the yard, he'd get up and go to the far corner of the kitchen and stand facing the wall, shaking. Sugar had stopped eating. She'd come to her bowl and stand over it, and then walk away, and she'd lost weight so fast I made an appointment to take her to the vet in town, and the morning of the appointment she was gone. We never found her whole. I found a part of her out past the corral 3 days later, and I buried it before Dina could see it, and I told Dina the old dog had wandered off to die, the way old dogs do. And Dina cried, and I held her, and I looked over her shoulder out the window at the mesa, and I thought, with a coldness that scared me worse than any of the rest of it, that whatever had done it had left that part of Sugar where I would find it and Dina wouldn't, that it knew the difference, that it had watched us long enough to know the difference. I started carrying the rifle everywhere after that, even to the barn, even to the woodpile. I told Dina it was lions. The stock started leaving. That's the part nobody tells you about in the stories, the way the ordinary animals vote with their feet. My cattle bunched up on the far southwest corner of the place, as far from the mesa as the fence would let them get, and they stood there in a tight knot day and night, packed together the way cattle pack in a blizzard, except there wasn't any blizzard, and when I brought hay out to them they wouldn't scatter to feed like they always had. They'd only shuffle a little and close the gap again, and go back to standing with their heads up and their eyes rolling, facing north. I had a good bay gelding named Chuck that I'd had 11 years, steadiest horse I ever owned, a horse I'd have trusted my own mother on, and One morning I went out to the corral and Chuck had run himself through the fence in the night, just torn straight through 4 strands of wire and gone. I found him 2 days later down along the county road, foundered and wild-eyed and lathered white in weather cold enough that a horse shouldn't have been able to work up a lather. And it took me and 2 other men the better part of a morning to catch him, and he was never right again after that. Something had put a fear in him that 11 years of gentle handling couldn't reach the bottom of. I understood how he felt. I was starting to feel it myself, that fence-breaking thing, that old animal certainty that the only sane move left was to run through whatever was in your way and keep running. It was around then that I saw the thing myself for the first time, in daylight, and could no longer make it into anything I had a word for. It was a bright cold afternoon toward the end of January, and I was up on the rise fixing the fence where the second heifer had been found, because a rancher fixes fence no matter what else is happening. Fence doesn't care about your troubles. I had the truck parked down the slope, and I was working the stretcher on a run of wire when I got the feeling of being looked at, that old animal feeling on the back of the neck. And I straightened up and looked out across the flat toward the foot of the mesa, and there was an animal standing out there watching me from maybe 200 yards off. At first I took it for a coyote, and then for a dog, and then I couldn't make it be either one. It was too big for a coyote, and it was standing wrong for a dog. It stood square and still, and it held its head level and pointed straight at me, and it did not move at all, not the small constant movements that a live animal makes, the ear flick, the weight shift, the sniff. It stood the way a photograph of an animal stands. And the longer I looked at it, the more the proportions came apart in my eye, the legs a little too long, the shoulders a little too high, the whole of it built to a plan that was close to a coyote and missed. And I had that same thought I'd had over the steer in the tree, that this was a thing that had studied a coyote very hard and gotten it nearly right. I had the rifle in the truck, down the slope, 40 feet away. I have gone over that 40 feet 1,000 times. I started down the slope toward it, walking sideways, keeping my eye on the animal, and the animal kept its head pointed at me and turned to follow me without moving its feet, without moving its body. Just the head coming around smooth and slow, tracking me, until I got to the truck and reached in behind the seat and got my hand on the rifle, and when I looked up again, it was gone. Not run off, gone. 200 yards of open flat with no cover taller than a man's knee, and nothing on it, and no dust and no shape going away over the rise. Gone the way a thought goes when you turn to look at it. I drove down to Leonard Nez's place that same afternoon. I didn't wait for the excuse of being busy to talk me out of it again. He was in his yard when I pulled in, splitting a little kindling on a stump, and he straightened up slow with his hand on his back and watched my truck come, and I saw him take in my face through the windshield, and something in his own face went still and old and sad. He set the hatchet down on the stump. He didn't say hello. He said you should have come sooner. I don't remember how I started telling it. I remember it came out of me in a rush, all of it, the heifer and the dry ground and the steer in the tree and the coyotes that talked like men and the dog and the thing on the flat that turned its head and vanished. And Leonard Nez stood there in his yard in the cold and listened to the whole of it without saying a word, and his face got older and older as I talked. And when I got to the part about the animal turning its head to follow me, he closed his eyes for a second. Just for a second, the way a man closes his eyes when he hears a thing he'd hoped not to hear. When I was done, he was quiet a while. Then he said, "Come inside, it's cold." His house was small and warm, and it smelled like cedar smoke and coffee and something else underneath. Some dry herb I didn't know, and there was a wood stove ticking in the corner and a percolator on it. And he poured me a cup without asking and set it in front of me and sat down across the table, and he wrapped both his old hands around his own cup and looked at them for a while before he looked at me. I'm not going to tell you everything Leonard Nez said to me that afternoon, and I'm not going to use the word he used, because he asked me not to, and because I've come to understand that the word is not mine to carry around and hand out to strangers. Some things you don't say out loud, not because they aren't real, but because saying them is a way of calling them, and he'd spent his whole life in that country learning exactly how careful a man has to be about what he calls. I'll tell you what I can. He asked me first if I'd taken anything. Off the land, off the mesa, out of the old places, bones, pots, anything. I said no, and I meant it, and then I remembered, and my mouth went dry, and I told him. Back in the fall, before any of it started, I'd been running fence up along the base of the mesa where I'd never had cause to go before, in a fold of the rock where the wind had cut a little overhang. And back under the overhang out of the weather, there had been some old things. A few pots broke and whole, and some other things I hadn't looked at close. And I'd known what they were. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. And I'd taken 2 of the whole pots and put them in the shed with a mind to maybe sell them, because I had a note due. Because everything that winter came back to a note due. I hadn't thought about it since. I'd forgotten them the way you forget a thing you don't want to have done. Leonard Nez looked at me across the table for a long moment, and I watched something go out of his face, some last small hope, and he said, very quiet, "You have to put them back. Tonight, before dark, you have to put them back exactly where you found them, and you have to say you're sorry for the taking of them, out loud, and you have to mean it, and that fixes it." I said. "No," he said. He didn't soften it. That was the thing about Leonard Nez. He wouldn't lie to me even to make me feel better, and I've come to be grateful for that even as I hate it. It doesn't fix it. Once it's noticed you, it's noticed you. But you don't add to the debt. You put them back, and you don't take anything else, and you don't say its name, and you don't look at it, and you don't answer it when it calls in a voice you know. That's the one I need you to hear, Wade. It's going to learn the voices of the people close to you. When it has them, it will use them. It will call you in a voice you love from out in the dark, and it will want you to come out, or it will want you to open the door, and whatever you do not open the door. You don't answer. You don't go out, no matter whose voice. The stove ticked. Outside, the light had already started to go long and red. I sat there with my coffee going cold in front of me, and I thought about my wife, asleep in our bed with 2 coyotes talking under the window. And I thought about the note due in January, and I thought, God help me, that this was an old man's story, that Leonard Nez was 80-some years old and had grown up in that country and believed the things his people believed, and I could respect all of it and still not have it be true. And even as I thought it, I knew I was lying to myself, because I had seen the thing turn its head, and no story turns its head. Put them back, I said. Tonight. Before dark, he said, and Wade. He reached across the table, this old man, and put his dry hand over mine, and his grip was stronger than I expected. After tonight, some evening soon, you and your wife should go stay in town a while. With her people, or a motel, I don't care. Just be gone from that house at night for a while. It's stronger there now than it should be. You built your whole life in the wrong quarter section, and your father did before you, right up against the foot of it, and it has had a long time to get used to you. I should have listened to all of it. I listened to half. That was the second real mistake, and unlike the first one, I can't blame it on being busy. I can only blame it on being the kind of man I've told you I am. The kind who won't spook, which turns out to be another way of saying the kind who won't run when running is the only sense left. I drove home in the last of the light with the 2 pots, wrapped in feed sacks on the seat beside me, and I took them up along the base of the mesa to the fold in the rock. And I'll tell you the truth, it was harder to go up there than anything I'd done yet, because the sun was down behind the mesa by the time I got to the overhang, and the cold came off that rock like breath off a freezer. And the whole time I was setting the pots back under the overhang where I'd found them, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold them, fine little shakes I couldn't stop. And I couldn't get the knot in the feed sack undone, a knot I'd tied 10,000 times. My fingers just wouldn't do it. And the whole time I had the feeling of being watched, not from any one direction, but from the rock itself, from the fold of it, from up in the dark of the overhang where the light didn't reach. I set the pots down where they'd been. I said I was sorry for the taking of them, out loud into the cold, feeling like a fool and not feeling like a fool at all, both at once. My voice came out of me wrong. thin and small in all that space, a stranger's voice saying a stranger's words. And when I was done, I stood up, and from somewhere back up in the dark of the mesa, a long way off, and yet not far enough, something answered me. It was not a coyote. It was not any animal I knew. It started low and climbed, and had almost the shape of a word in it, almost my own name in it, stretched and pulled like taffy, and I did not wait to hear it finish. I got down off that mesa faster than was safe in the dark, and I drove home with the heater roaring and my knuckles white on the wheel, and behind me in the mirror the mesa stood up black against the last green light in the sky, and I did not look at it any more than I had to. I didn't tell Dina. That was the third mistake, and it's the one I'll answer for the longest, because it wasn't fatigue and it wasn't stubbornness, it was shame. I couldn't find a way to sit at our table and tell my wife that I'd stolen pots to sell against the note and brought this down on us, and that an old man had told me we needed to leave our own home in the dark, and that I believed him. So I didn't. I told myself I'd move her to town in a few days, once I'd figured out how to explain it, once I had it worked out. I told myself we had time. We had 3 days. They were the worst 3 days I have ever lived through, and I'm not going to be able to make you feel the length of them, because on the page 3 days is a line, and in the living of them it was a year. It came every night after that, and every night it was closer, and it knew more. The first night after I put the pots back, it was out by the corral, and it was walking. I heard it from the bedroom, and against every instinct I've got, I made myself get up and go to the window, instead of pulling the blanket over my head like a child, because I had to know. There was a moon, most of one, and by its light I could see out across the yard to the corral, and there was a shape moving along the corral rail, and at first I thought it was a man, because it was walking upright. And then it went down onto all fours and crossed a stretch of open ground faster than a man can run, low and wrong, the elbows going up over the line of the back, and then it stood up again on the far side by the shed, and it was a man's height and a man's shape again, and it stood there facing the house, facing my window, and I stepped back from the glass, and I did not breathe. It knew I was there. I know it knew. It stood facing my window for the better part of an hour, and I stood back in the dark of the room and watched it through the gap in the curtain, and did not let it see me move. And Dina slept. Thank God, Dina slept. The second night, it had the dog's voice. We'd buried what I'd found of sugar, but that second night there came a scratching at the back door, low down at the bottom of the door, the exact sound of a dog wanting in on a cold night, and then a whine, and it was Sugar's whine. It was exactly Sugar's whine, that particular rising note she made. And Pete came off his corner in the kitchen and went stiff-legged toward the door, with his whole body shaking and his lips pulled back. And I got between him and the door, and the scratching came again, patient, and the whine came again. And I stood there in my bare feet, on the cold linoleum with the rifle in my hands, and I did not open the door. I put my hand flat on the wood of the door, and I could feel it there on the other side, not the cold of the night, something else, a warmth wrong for the hour, and the scratching stopped, and the whine stopped, and then very softly, right against the other side of the door where my hand was, so close it was almost in the house already, it said my name. It said it in Dina's voice. It said Wade in my wife's voice, soft, from the other side of the door, and behind me in our bed I heard Dina stir and half wake and say, "Wade," in the exact same voice, the real one, thick with sleep, wondering where I had gone, and for one whole second I could not tell you which voice was my wife. For 1 second I stood between two voices that were the same voice, and I understood exactly what Leonard Nez had meant, that it would learn the voices of the people close to me, and that when it had them, it would use them. And I understood that it had been listening at our walls for weeks, patient, gathering us up voice by voice, and that this, all of this, the cattle, the dog, the pots, had only ever been it learning the house so it could get inside it. I went to the bed. I did not open the door. I lay down next to my wife, and I held onto her so hard she woke up all the way and asked me what was wrong, and I told her I'd had a bad dream, and outside the door, the thing that had her voice waited a while longer and then went away. And I lay there holding my wife and listening to it go, its feet on the frozen ground, unhurried, in no rush at all, because it knew as well as I did that it had all the time in the world and I had 3 days. The next morning I finally told her. Not all of it, even then, God forgive me, but enough. I told her we had to go to town, to her sister's, that night, both of us, that there was something wrong at the ranch, something I couldn't explain, that a man I trusted had told me we needed to be gone from the house at night for a while. She looked at me across the kitchen for a long time. She'd heard the coyotes. She had seen Pete gone strange and Sugar dead. She was not a foolish woman, and she knew me. She knew I was not a man given to fear, and I watched her decide to believe me, watched her set aside every reasonable thing in favor of the look on my husband's face. And she said, "All right, tonight. I'll call Renee." We should have left that morning. I've thought about that too. But there was stock to see, to water to break the ice on. A life doesn't stop being a life just because something's hunting you. And I told her the daylight was fine. It only came at night. And that much, at least I still believe, was true. We packed a couple bags. She called her sister. And all that short gray day I did my chores with the rifle on my back and the sky pressing down close and yellow with a storm that wouldn't quite come, and Marcus didn't show, and I couldn't raise him on the phone, and I told myself he'd just decided he wanted no more part of it, and I couldn't even blame him. We meant to leave at 4, before the light went. That's the thing I hold on to, that we meant to leave in time, that I'd finally done the sensible thing, that we were an hour from being gone. But the truck wouldn't start. It had started fine that morning. That afternoon it turned over and wouldn't catch. And I got out and got the hood up, and there wasn't anything wrong that I could see. No reason for it, everything where it should be. And Dina's little car had been dead in the barn since November, waiting on a part, and the light was already going long and red across the yard. And I stood there with my hands in the guts of a truck that had no reason not to start, and I understood that we were not going to be allowed to leave. I want to be careful and honest here. I don't know that the thing stopped my truck. A truck is a truck, and they quit for their own reasons. But I know what the timing of it did to me, standing there in the last light with my wife watching me from the porch. And I know that from that moment, I stopped thinking about running and started thinking about the house as the last thing between us and the dark. And I know that this is exactly what it wanted me thinking, and that even knowing it, I couldn't think anything else. I got Dina inside. I checked every window, and I bolted the front and back doors, and I pushed the kitchen table up against the back door, because the back door was the weak one, the one it had scratched at. And I built up the fire in the wood stove until the house was too hot, because I could not stand the thought of the cold getting in with the dark. And I loaded the 30-06 and set a box of shells on the table, and I loaded the 22 as well, and leaned it in the corner. Not because the 22 LR was going to do anything, but because a man wants everything he's got in reach. I put Pete in the bedroom with Dina, and told her to keep the door shut and to not come out no matter what she heard, no matter whose voice she heard. And that was the hardest thing to explain, and I saw her not fully understand it, and I made her promise anyway, no matter whose voice. She promised. She was so pale. I have never loved her the way I loved her right then, promising me a thing she didn't understand because she trusted me, and me knowing I'd brought it on her. The sun went down. I sat at the kitchen table with the rifle across my knees and the one bulb burning over the stove, and I waited. And for a long while there was nothing but the wind and the tick of the stove and the small settling sounds of a house getting cold on the outside and staying hot on the in. I thought maybe I'd been wrong. I thought maybe putting the pots back had been enough after all. Maybe Leonard Nez was wrong about the debt. Maybe it had lost interest. And I want you to know that even that late, even then, part of me was still reaching for the reasonable thing, still trying to build a floor under my feet out of maybes. Then Pete started up in the bedroom, that low chest sound, and I heard Denna hush him, and the first thing touched the house. It came at the back door. At the table I'd braced against it, a slow, steady pressure, not a pounding, a leaning, like a great weight settling against the wood, and the table legs squealed an inch across the linoleum and stopped, and I got up and put my own weight against the table and my shoulder to it, and through the wood I could feel it on the other side, that wrong warmth, that patience, and it leaned and I braced, and for a while it was just the two of us, me and it, pushing on a door in the dark with an inch of pine between us, and it could have come through. I've thought about that since. It was strong enough to fold a steer into a tree. It could have come through that door like it was paper. It didn't. It leaned, and it tested, and I understood that it was not trying to break in. It wanted me to open the door. All of it, everything was bent toward getting me to be the one who opened the door, because a threshold is a threshold, and there are rules even for a thing like that. Rules I don't understand, and Leonard Nez wouldn't fully say, and the one rule I could feel in my bones through the wood of that door was that it needed me to invite it, and I was not going to. I was not ever going to, and it knew that now, and so it stopped leaning. And it started to talk. It went around the house in the dark, slow, and at each window it stopped and it talked, and it had all of us. It had Sugar's whine and Pete's bark, it had the coyotes, and then it started in on the people. It had my father's voice. It stood outside the kitchen window, and it talked to me in my father's voice, and it did not sound sick or old the way my father sounded now. It sounded the way my father sounded 20 years ago, strong, and it called me son. And it told me to come out, that everything was all right, that it had been a mistake, all of it. And I sat at the table with tears running down my face and the rifle shaking in my hands, and I did not answer, because my father was in a bed in Farmington and did not know my name half the time, and the thing outside the window did not know that, or knew it and didn't care, and either way, it was not my father. Then it had Marcus's voice, out by the corral, calling for help, saying he was hurt, saying his truck had gone off the road, saying, Wade, Wade, please. And I thought about Marcus not showing up that morning and not answering his phone, and I want you to know it took everything I had, everything, to stay in that chair. Because what if that's how it works? It doesn't need you to believe it. It only needs the what if. It only needs you to not be able to live with the one time it might be real. I sat in the chair. I held onto the seat of the chair with one hand until my fingers ached. I did not go out to Marcus, and Marcus, the real one, I found out later, had been in town the whole day with a truck that wouldn't start, same as mine, and had tried to call me and couldn't get through, same as me, and had been half out of his mind with worry and was fine. It was never Marcus at the corral. But I didn't know that then. I only knew I couldn't be the one who opened the door. And then, near the worst hour of the night, it came to the bedroom window, and it used Denna's voice, and it called for me, and it called me the pet name she calls me that nobody else in the world knows. And behind the bedroom door I heard my actual wife make a sound, a small broken sound, because she was hearing it too. She was hearing her own voice, calling her husband from the other side of the glass. And I heard her get up, and I was already up and moving. I crossed the house, and I hit the bedroom door with my shoulder, and I got in there, and she was standing at the window with her hand on the latch, not because she believed it was her, but because the sound of it, the wrongness of hearing your own voice from outside, had pulled her up out of the bed toward it like a hook. And I got her hand off the latch, and I pulled her back, and I held her on the floor in the corner of the room with Pete pressed against us, both shaking, and outside the window her own voice called, and then slowly ran down and changed and stopped sounding like her and started sounding like all of them at once. My father and Marcus and Sugar and the coyotes, and under it all something that had never been any of them, and then it stopped. And that was the worst part. Not the voices, the stopping. Because when it stopped, the quiet that came down was total. and in that quiet I understood that it had run out of voices it needed us to answer, that it had tried every door it knew how to try, and we had not opened any of them, and that now it was going to do the last thing, whatever the last thing was, and I did not know what the last thing was. And I lay on the floor of my bedroom holding my wife and my dog with a rifle I did not believe would help me, and I waited for the last thing in a silence so complete I could hear the frost forming on the window glass. A tiny sound, a small dry ticking, like something very lightly tapping. I have gone over what happened next more times than I can count, and I still cannot give it to you clean, because I did not see all of it, and what I saw in pieces, in the moonlight, through a gap in the curtain, and my mind has never agreed to put the pieces together into one thing. The window went dark. The moon had been coming through it, a gray square of light on the floor, and the square of light went out, all at once, blocked, filled, and I heard the glass make a sound, not breaking, a sound like a wet finger drawn across it, and the whole house seemed to lean, to tip the way the day had tipped that first morning over the heifer, everything going a few degrees off level, and Pete stopped shaking and went absolutely still against me, and I raised the rifle at the dark shape filling the window, and I did not fire. Because Leonard Nez's voice was in my head saying, "You don't look at it," and some deeper thing than sense was telling me that firing was answering, that pulling that trigger was me opening a door too, and I lowered the rifle, and I turned my face away from the window, and I put my face down against my wife's hair, and I told her, don't look at it, keep your eyes shut," and she did, and I did, and we lay there on the floor of our own bedroom with our eyes shut like children while the thing at the window looked in at us, and the temperature of the room dropped until I could see my breath even in the heat from the stove, and the smell came in, a smell like a chest freezer that's been unplugged a week, like meat and cold and something underneath that I have never smelled before or since, and hope to God I never smell again. And it spoke one more time, right against the glass, and this time it did not use anyone's voice. This time it used a voice that was only its own, and I will not tell you what it said, partly because I did not understand the words, and partly because the few I did understand I have worked very hard to forget, and I am not going to dig them back up to put in a story. I will only tell you that it was not asking anymore. The voices at the doors had been asking. This was not asking. This was telling us what it was going to do, and when, and it had all the patience in the world, and it wanted us to know that a locked door was not a no, it was only a not yet. Then the moon came back into the window, and the smell thinned out, and Pete let out a long breath against my chest, and it was gone. We stayed on the floor of that room until the sky went gray, and then until the sun was full up, and neither of us said a word the whole time. When it was good and light, I got up and looked out, and the yard was empty and ordinary and cold, and there was frost on everything, and there were no tracks anywhere, not one, not under the windows where I'd heard it walk for hours, not by the corral where it had called in Marcus's voice, nothing. The frost lay smooth and unbroken right up to the walls of the house, like the house was sitting in the middle of a clean white sheet, and that was somehow worse than 1,000 tracks would have been. The truck started on the first try. We left. We didn't pack anything more than the bags already by the door. I put Pete in the cab between us, and we drove out over the cattle guard and down the 2 ruts to the county pavement, and I did not look in the mirror, and Denna did not look out the window, and we drove to her sister's in town, and we did not talk about it, and we have never really talked about it since, not straight on, only around the edges, the way you talk about a death. I called Leonard Nez from town that afternoon to tell him we'd gotten out, and a woman answered his phone, a granddaughter, I think, and she was crying, and she told me that Leonard Nez had passed in the night. In his sleep, she said. Peaceful, she said. An old man, 86, it was his time. And maybe it was. I want it to have been. But I have never been able to stop the cold arithmetic of my own mind from lining up the hours, from putting the time of the thing leaving my window against the time an old man 1.5 miles away stopped breathing, and I have never been able to decide whether Leonard Nez did something that night to turn it away from us, something that cost him what it cost him, or whether it simply went from our house to his because his was the last door in that country that knew how to say no to it, and it wanted that door shut for good. I don't know. I will never know. I lit a candle for him that I did not know how to light right, and I said I was sorry, out loud, the way he'd taught me, and I hoped it reached him. We never went back to live there. I leased the grazing to a man from Aztec who runs his cattle on it now, and who has never mentioned any trouble, and I have thought about warning him, and I have never been able to figure out how or what I'd even say, and I have come to believe that it was never about the land or the cattle. It was about me, about the taking, about the debt, and that the man from Aztec is fine because the man from Aztec never went up under that overhang and put his hands on what wasn't his. I hope that's true. I lie awake some nights and hope that's true. My father died that spring, up in the home in Farmington, and near the end the nurse told me he'd been talking to somebody in his room at night, having whole conversations, laughing sometimes, and the nurse thought it was sweet, an old man talking to the people from his past. And I did not tell her to move him, and I did not tell her to keep the window covered, and I did not tell her any of it, because what would I have said? And because he was going to die anyway, and because some part of me could not bear to find out whose voice it was in that room with him at night, whether it was still working its way through the people close to me one at a time, patient, in no rush, taking its time the way it had all along. We live in town now, in a rental, on a street with other houses close on both sides, and we are getting by. Dina went full-time at the clinic. I do diesel work at a shop off the highway, and I am good at it, and it is honest, and I do not have to go out in the dark. Pete died 2 years ago, old age, in his sleep on the kitchen floor, and I like to think there was nothing in it but old age, and mostly I believe that. I still park the truck facing the road. Every time, without thinking about it, nose out, keys in the cup holder, like a man who might need to leave in a hurry. Dina's asked me about it once or twice, and I tell her it's just a habit from the ranch, and she lets it go, and it is a habit from the ranch. That much is true. And I keep the porch light on all night, every night, the way my father did the last years of his life, and I never asked him why he did it, and now I can't, but I think I know. I think he knew that country better than he ever let on, and I think he'd made his own arrangements with it, quarter section by quarter section, night by night. One bare bulb hung out in all that dark. Last week the neighbor's dog got out and came scratching at our back door, in the small hours low down at the bottom of the door, and whined to be let in out of the cold. And I lay there in the dark of a house in town on a street, with street lights and other houses close on both sides, and I listened to it scratch and whine, and I did not get up, and I did not open the door. And after a while my wife rolled over and asked me, half asleep, why I wasn't letting the poor thing in. I told her I was fixing to. I never did. The long empty. The coyote had been keeping pace with my truck for 4 miles, and it was doing it at 60. I want to be clear about that number, because everything after it depends on the number being true, and I have spent a long time now trying to make it not true. 60 miles an hour. That is what the needle said. Steady. My hand loose on the wheel, the way it gets after 22 years of driving, and off the shoulder to my right, down in the borrow ditch where the reflectors quit and the desert started, there was an animal running level with my cab. Not falling back, not gaining. Just there, the way the moon is there, pacing me across a country that had no reason to hold anything alive at that hour. I remember I laughed, not because it was funny, because the mind does that. It reaches for the small explanation and holds it up like a lantern. A dog off a ranch. A spooked pronghorn cutting a diagonal that only looked like it matched me. I even said it out loud, alone in the cab with the radio down low. "Run, buddy," I said. "You'll blow a gasket." It ran another mile. Then the ditch swung wide around a culvert, and it should have had to break stride, and it didn't. It came up out of the low ground and crossed a fence line that I saw plain in the wash of my headlights, 4 strands of barbed wire strung tight on cedar posts, and it did not jump the fence. and it did not go through the fence. It was on one side, and then it was on the other, and the wire never moved. That was the first time. I want to lay it down in order, because order is the only thing I still own about that night, and even the order has started to soften at the edges like a photograph left too long on a dashboard. Gone pale and then gone blank. Let me back up. My name does not matter, and I would rather not put it down anyway. I drove for a carrier out of Oklahoma City for most of my working life, and toward the end I was pulling a dry van on a lane that ran me from the yard down through Amarillo and across into New Mexico and Arizona and back. 3-4 days at a stretch, sleeping in the bunk at the truck stops when the hours ran out. Reefer work pays better, but I never liked hauling other people's groceries. Dry van, you haul boxes. Boxes do not spoil, and boxes do not care if you are 2 hours late into Winslow. I liked that. I liked a load that did not need me to be anybody in particular. I was 51 that year. My knees were shot from climbing in and out of the cab, and I had a knot of scar tissue on the back of my right hand from a load bar that let go in 1996 and split me open to the bone. And I still felt that hand in the cold. My wife had been gone 11 years by then, not dead, just gone, back to her people in Tulsa, and I did not blame her. You cannot be married to a man who was home 9 days a month. My daughter I talked to on the phone. She was grown, she had her own kids. She called me on Sundays if I was parked somewhere with a signal. I lived in the truck more than I lived anywhere. That is not a sad thing when you are the one doing it. It is only sad from the outside. She had called me that Sunday, my daughter. I was parked at a rest area east of Amarillo eating a gas station sandwich, and she called, and we talked about nothing the way we always did. Her kids' soccer, a leak under her kitchen sink, whether I was eating all right, and I lied and said I was, and she told me she loved me at the end like she always did, quick, offhand, like it was punctuation, and I said it back, and I did not think anything of it. You do not think anything of it. That is the trap of a life. You spread it out thin over a lot of Sundays because you think there will always be another Sunday, and mostly you are right, and the one time you are wrong is the time that teaches you, and by then it is too late to have done it different. I did not know when I hung up that phone that I would spend a good part of the next 3 days trying to get her voice back into my head to push another voice out of it. You do not get to know things like that in advance. The desert does, maybe. I did not. I had a routine on that lane, worn smooth as a saddle. Fuel at the same 3 stops. Coffee black, no sugar, because sugar makes you crash at 2 in the afternoon, and 2 in the afternoon is where the accidents live. A candy bar in the door pocket for when the coffee was not enough. I kept a little travel Bible in the map pocket that I never read. My grandmother's, soft-covered, the spine gone white, more a thing I carried than a thing I used. I kept a tire thumper behind the seat and a good flashlight and a folding knife, and under the mattress in the bunk, a pistol I had a permit for in the States that would honor it and did not talk about in the ones that would not. I mention the pistol because you will want to know later why I did not use it, and the answer is that I did think of it that night at the Scale House. My hand went back for it once, and I will tell you what stopped me when I get there. I knew that country the way you know a hallway in your own house in the dark. I knew where the state cops sat and where the deer came down to the road and where the wind hit you crossing the high open ground so hard it would push a light trailer over into the next lane if you were not leaning into it already. I knew the good stops and the bad ones and the closed ones. I knew the closed Scale House I would end up behind. Knew it like, a landmark, a dark building you have rolled past 100 times without a single thought. And if you had told me on the Sunday my daughter called that I would spend the worst night of my life parked behind it, I would have laughed at you, and then I would have driven right to it anyway, because a man does not get to pick the building. The night picks the building. I know that now. I am telling you the ordinary parts because I need you to understand that I was not a man who was looking for anything. I did not believe in much. I believed in air pressure and logbooks and the fact that if you keep your following distance, you will mostly get to keep your teeth. I had driven the high desert at night maybe 1,000 times, Interstate 40 across the top of it, US 491 running up north out of Gallup, the little state roads that go out to nowhere and then keep going. I had seen everything the desert does at night. I had seen dust devils lit up by lightning. I had seen a whole herd of elk standing in the fog on the road up by the Continental Divide like they were waiting for a bus. I had seen the northern lights once, way down south, where they had no business being. None of it ever scared me. It was just the country being big. There was one thing, though, that I had heard, that I had put away and not looked at like a man does. Years back, in the late 90s, I was fueling up in Gallup at 3 in the morning, and there was another driver at the island. An older man, Navajo, ran a flatbed for an outfit out of Farmington. And we got to talking the way drivers do at 3 in the morning. And somewhere in it, he asked me if I ran the roads north of there, the reservation roads, the empty ones. And I said, sometimes. And he got quiet. And then he told me, not like he was trying to scare me, just flat. The way you tell a man where the ice is, that there were things on those roads a man should not talk about after dark, and that if I ever saw something out on the road at night that made the hair on my arm stand up, an animal that moved wrong, a person walking where no person should be, I should not look at it, and I should not name it, and I should, for the love of God, not stop. Then he capped his tank and he got in his truck and he pulled out, and I stood there at the island in the cold thinking, well, that was a strange old bird, and I filled my tank and I forgot about him. Or I thought I forgot about him. He came back to me that night at the scale house, whole, every word, the way things do when it is finally too late for them to help you. It was just the country being big. That is what I told myself for 20 years. It was just the country being big. The load that week was auto parts, palletized, headed for a warehouse outside Flagstaff. I had picked up in Oklahoma City on a Monday, and I was running behind because of a closure on Interstate 40 near Albuquerque, some jackknife that shut the westbound down for 3 hours. And by the time I cleared Grants, it was pushing 11 at night, and I was tired in the particular way you get when you have already told yourself you will make it, and you are not sure anymore that you will. I stopped for fuel and coffee at a place I had stopped 100 times, a little independent truck stop off the interstate that I will not name, because the family that runs it are good people and they do not need my story attached to their sign. I got my coffee, I did my walk around, kicked the tires, checked the load straps out of habit even on a sealed van. The night was clear and cold, the kind of high desert cold that has no wet in it at all, that just pulls the heat off your skin and gives you nothing back. The stars were out hard. Out there, away from the towns, the sky is not black. It is gray with stars, so many that they stop being points and start being a kind of weather. There was an old man by the ice machine. I noticed him about as much as you notice anything at a truck stop at 11 at night, which is to say barely. He was Navajo, I thought, older, in a denim jacket gone pale at the seams and a cap with no logo on it, and he was just standing there by the ice machine not buying ice. He had his hands in his jacket pockets. When I came out with my coffee, he looked at me. Not hard. Not the way a man looks at you when he wants something. He looked at me the way you look at a weather front coming in, like I was a thing that was going to happen whether he watched it or not. I gave him the little nod you give. He did not give it back. He said something low in a language I did not have, and then he said one thing in English, and I have gone over it 10,000 times, and I am sure of the words even now. He said, "Don't stop for it." I thought he was drunk. I thought he was one of the ones the road produces, the men who have come loose from their lives and drift around the fuel islands asking for change and telling you things. I said something like, "You have a good night, sir," and I climbed up in my cab, and I pulled out, and I watched him in my west mirror, standing by the ice machine getting small, and he did not move. He just watched me go. And the last I saw of him, he had taken one hand out of his pocket, and he was holding it up, not waving, just holding it up flat, like a man taking an oath, or like a man telling a truck to stop. Then the ramp took me back up onto Interstate 40 westbound, and I put him out of my mind. That is the thing I keep coming back to. He told me the one true thing anybody told me that whole night, and I put him out of my mind before I was through second gear. The coyote came about 40 minutes later. I have already told you about the coyote. I told you it ran at 60 and crossed the fence without the wire moving. What I did not tell you is what I did after, because after is where it starts, and I have been putting it off the way you put off the part of a story where you come out looking like a fool. I slowed down. I want to be honest. When the animal came up over the fence line and I lost it out past the reach of my lights, my foot came off the fuel on its own. I told myself I was being careful, that if there was one animal, there might be a herd, that a full-grown pronghorn through the windshield at highway speed will kill a man just as dead as a bridge abutment. That is what I told myself. But the truth is that some older part of me, the part that runs the body before the mind gets a vote, had already decided the animal was worth slowing down for, and it slowed the truck. So I was down around 45, coasting, my brights up, sweeping the ditch on the right, when the thing stood up on the left. It came up out of the median. There is no cover in that median. It is graded flat and graveled, 100 feet of nothing between the eastbound and the westbound, with a dip in the middle where the water runs and the 2 weeks a year it rains. Nothing can hide there. A jackrabbit cannot hide there. But it came up out of the median on my left side the way a man stands up out of tall grass, unfolding, taller than it had any business being, and for 1/2 of 1 second my lights caught it broadside. It was the coyote. I knew the coloring, the gray and the rust, the black tip on the tail, but it was standing up, not sitting up like a dog begs, standing on 2 legs, its front legs hanging down in front of it, and the joints of those legs were wrong. They had an extra bend in them, an angle where no angle goes. And the head was a coyote's head, but it sat too high on the neck, tilted, cocked over to the side and looking at me, and the eyes threw my headlights back, green and flat, like 2 chips of bottle glass. Then I was past it. I did not slow down anymore. Both my feet did something at once, one coming off nothing and the other going down on the fuel. And the turbo spooled up, and I felt the load settle back against the 5th wheel, and I put my hands at 10 and 2, like a kid taking his first road test. And I got that truck back up to 70, and I held it there, and I did not look in the mirror. That is a lie. I looked in the mirror. There was nothing in the mirror but my own running lights and the dark closing up behind me, like water behind a boat. For a long time I drove and did not think anything at all. The mind will do that too. It goes quiet, it goes flat, it takes the thing you saw and it puts it in a box and it sits on the lid, and you drive. I drove. The mile markers came and went. The road was empty. That is the thing about that country at that hour. You can drive 40 miles and not see another set of lights, and a road with no other trucks on it stops feeling like a road and starts feeling like a hallway. I got my breathing back. I got my hands loose. I told myself the thing I have already told you, that I was tired, that I had been up since 4 that morning, that a tired mind will build a monster out of a shadow and a set of eyes, tapetum lucidum. I actually thought the word, or most of it, the shine behind an animal's eyes that throws your light back. Cats and dogs and deer all have it. Coyotes have it. And if a coyote reared up on a rock in the median with the light hitting it, just so, a tired man could put an extra joint in its legs. I built the whole thing back down into something I could keep in the truck with me. I am good at that. I have talked myself down off of black ice at 70 with a load pushing me, and I did not so much as lift, and I talked myself down off of the thing in the median the same way. By the time I saw the sign for the next town, I almost had it beat. Then the CB crackled. I ran a CB out of habit more than use. Most of the traffic on the road now is on their phones, and the channels are dead most nights, or it is 2 drivers 100 miles apart cussing about a scale house. But I kept it on low, channel 19, the way you keep a window cracked, just to have a little of the world coming in. And it crackled, and a voice came out of it, and the voice said, "My handle." Nobody had called me by my handle in 3 years. It was an old one, from when I ran with a couple of other drivers out of the Oklahoma City yard before two of them retired and one of them died. It was a joke handle, the kind you get stuck with, and I will not put it down here either, but it was mine, and it was not a handle anybody on that road in that state would have known. "You out here," the voice said, not a question, flat, and there was something under it, a hiss, a wrongness in the shape of the words, like a man talking around a mouth that had too much in it. I did not key the mic. I sat there with my thumb off the button and my coffee going cold in the holder, and I watched the little red numbers on the radio, 19, and I waited. "You slowed down," the voice said. "Back there. You slowed down for me. That was kind. I want to tell you I did something. I want to tell you I keyed up and told it to go to hell, or that I killed the radio, or that I did any single thing a man is supposed to do. I did not. I drove. I held 70, and I stared at the road, and I let it talk, because turning it off felt like turning my back on it, and I did not want to turn my back on it. Some animal part of me had decided that too. "Long way to Flagstaff," it said. "You want the company. You've been alone a long time. 11 years. I had not told a living soul on that road that my wife left 11 years ago. I had told the old man nothing. I had told the truck stop nothing. That number lived in me and in my daughter and in a lawyer in Tulsa and nowhere else on this earth, and it came out of my CB radio at midnight in the mouth of a thing that had stood up out of a median on two broken legs, and that was when the last of my talking down went out of me all at once, the way the air goes out of a tire when the sidewall lets go, not slow, not a hiss, just gone, flat, done. I reached over and I turned the CB off. The silence after was worse than the voice. I want that understood. As long as it was talking, I knew where it was. It was in the radio. It was a thing coming through wires and a speaker. It was outside. When I turned the knob and the little red numbers died, the quiet that came in was the quiet of not knowing. And I have never been so aware of the inside of my own truck, the bunk behind me in the dark, the reach of the sleeper where a man cannot see without turning around, the passenger seat, the space in the footwell. I drove with my eyes on the road and my whole skin turned backward, listening. Nothing. Engine, tires, wind. The small tick of the turn signal I did not remember turning on that I reached over and shut off. Nothing. I did the math, like a driver does. I was maybe 30 miles from the state line, another 40 past that to a truck stop I trusted. A big one, chain, lit up like a ball field. 40 islands, 100 trucks in the lot on a slow night. Showers, a diner that never closed, people, lights. I got it in my head, like a harbor. I would run to the big stop, and I would park in the middle of all those trucks under all those lights, and I would not be alone. And whatever this was, whatever I had let follow me out of the dark, it would not come in where the people were. That is what I told myself. I built the big truck stop up in my mind into a fort, and I ran for it. For a few miles, I let myself believe I had left it behind. The road ran flat and straight and empty. The white lines coming at me and going under, the mile markers ticking off, and I got my speed up and I kept my eyes moving. Road, mirror, road, ditch, road, over and over, and there was nothing. No coyote in the ditch, no eyes in the median, nothing pacing me. I remember I turned the radio back on, the FM, not the CB, just to have a human voice, and I found a station out of Albuquerque playing old country, and it was Merle Haggard, and I turned it up, and for about 4 minutes I was just a tired man driving a truck at night listening to Merle Haggard, and it was the last 4 minutes of my old life, and I did not know to be grateful for them. Then the man was standing on the shoulder up ahead in my lights, way up at the far reach of my brights, a figure on the right shoulder, standing, facing me, and my foot came off the fuel like it always will. An old reflex. You see a person on the shoulder at night, you back off, and I got my eyes on him as I came up, And he was just a man, a regular man, standing on the shoulder in the cold with his hands at his sides, not waving, not thumbing a ride, just standing, facing the oncoming lane, facing me. And I want to tell you the exact thing that was wrong with him. Because a feeling you can wave off, and a fact you cannot. And the fact was this: he was not squinting. My brights were on him, full. The kind of light that makes a deer freeze and a man throw his arm up over his face, and he did not squint, and he did not flinch, and he did not turn his head. He stood in the full white of my high beams, and looked straight into them with his eyes wide open and his face slack, and as I came up level with him, close enough to see the pale of his hands, he turned his head to keep looking at me, slow, tracking me, the way the coyote's head had tracked me, the head going around on the neck while the body stayed square to the road. Further than a head goes, a little further than a head goes. I did not stop. I got a fast breath of him, and then he was behind me, and I put my eyes back on the road, and I told myself out loud, keep driving, and I did not look in the mirror. And then, because a man cannot help himself, I looked in the mirror. He was gone off the shoulder. That did not surprise me. What surprised me, what put the cold all the way down through the middle of me, was the sound that came a second later, not from the mirror, from beside me, from the right, out past the passenger door, out in the black, beyond the reach of my lights, where the desert ran flat and open, with nothing on it, no ranch, no road, no fence a man could run along. It was footfalls, running, keeping pace. Out there in the dark to my right, level with my cab matching me, and I was doing 72. I looked 72, and something was running along beside me in the open desert at 72 miles an hour. And I could hear it. A fast, light, rhythmless patter. Too many beats in it. More feet in it than a thing that runs on 2 feet has, and then, worse, it changed mid-stride. The rhythm of it opened up and slowed and evened out into the long-reaching gait of something big running flat out on 4 legs, and it never lost a step doing it. It just changed what it was in the middle of the running, the way you change gears, and it stayed right with me. I did the only thing left. I pushed the truck. I ran her up past 80, past where I ever run a loaded van, the whole rig shaking, the wind screaming in the mirror brackets. The engine wound out, and the thing in the dark stayed with me, easy, not straining. And it did not gain, and it did not fall back. And I understood the way I had understood at the scale house before I ever got to the scale house, that it was not chasing me. It was walking beside me. It was pacing me because it wanted to, and it would go however fast I went. And the going fast was for me, not for it. It was letting me tire myself out and burn my fuel and scare myself hollow. And it could do this all night, and it knew it, and it wanted me to know it. And that was when the check engine light came on, and the power started to go, and the temperature needle began to climb. And I knew, sick all the way down, that the running was over, and it had let me run only as far as it wanted me to. I did not make it to the big truck stop. About 12 miles short of the state line, the check engine light came on, and then the truck started losing power, and I knew the sound. I had heard it before, a fuel problem, the engine starving and catching and starving, the whole rig starting to buck, and the temperature needle climbing. I nursed it. 22 years, you learn to nurse a sick engine. You feather it, you keep the revs where it will still pull, you look for a place to get off the road before it quits somewhere it will get you killed. And there was a place. There is always a place. That is the thing the road provides. And I have thought since that maybe the road provided that night on purpose. Maybe the place was set out for me the way you set out bait. It was a scale house, a way station, state port of entry, the kind they built in the 60s, and half of them are closed now, bypassed, the newer ones automated so a truck never has to stop. This one was closed. I knew it was closed. I had rolled past its dark windows 50 times. There was a wide apron of cracked concrete, a set of scales grown up with weeds in the seams, a low-block building with a flat roof and a light on a pole that had gone orange and dim, the way those old sodium lights do at the end, and past all of it a chain link fence, and then the desert, flat and pale, and going out to a horizon you could not see, only feel the place where the stars stopped. I got the truck onto the apron and around behind the building where the shoulder widened, and I set the brakes, and the engine died on its own before I even reached for the key, just quit, and the quiet came down over everything like a lid. It was 12:41 in the morning. I remember because the dash clock was the last lit thing in the cab after the engine died, the little green numbers 12:41, and I sat and looked at them, and I did not want to turn the key back and find out if she would start, because as long as I did not try, I could still believe she would. I got my phone out. 1 bar, then no bars, then 1. I have never in my life wanted to see those little bars so bad. I got a text to send, I think, to my daughter, or I started one, I do not even remember what it said, and then the bar was gone and it hung there with the little spinning wheel and it never sent. And I have wondered since if it went out into the dark and got caught the way everything else that night got caught. Then I heard the first footstep on the concrete. I know the sound of a boot on concrete. Everybody does. It is one of the most ordinary sounds there is. A weight coming down on a hard, flat surface, a little grit under the heel, the small scuff of it. That is what I heard. Out past the driver's door. Out on the apron behind the building, where there was no reason on God's earth for a man to be at 12:41 in the morning at a closed-scale house 40 miles from the nearest anything, 1 footstep. Then a pause. Then another, coming slow, coming around the back corner of the building toward my truck. I did not move. I have talked to men who were in firefights, and they say the same thing, that the body knows before the mind does, that you go still the way a rabbit goes still, that stillness is older than running and older than fighting, and it comes up out of the bottom of you without asking. I went still. I sat in the dark of my cab with my dead phone in my hand, and I listened to a man I could not see walk toward my truck on the cracked concrete, 1 boot and then the other, unhurried, taking his time. And I understood in my gut before I understood it anywhere else that whatever was walking out there had all the time in the world, and knew it. The footsteps stopped under my window. There is a thing that happens to your hearing when you are that afraid. It narrows. All the little sounds you live inside of every day, the ones you never notice, they fall away, and what is left is huge and close and terrible. I could hear my own pulse, not feel it, hear it. A soft, heavy sound in my ears, like someone across a room turning the pages of a book. I could hear the tick of the engine cooling under the hood. And I could hear, right outside my door, 4 feet below my window, the sound of something breathing. It was not right, the breathing. That is the only way I know to say it. It had the shape of breathing, the in and the out, but the rhythm was off. It came too slow and then too fast, and there was a catch in it. A click at the top of each breath, like there was a part in the throat that did not fit. And under the breath, very low. So low I felt it more than heard it. There was another sound, a kind of dry rubbing, like 2 pieces of leather worked against each other, or like the sound a big dog makes deep in its chest before it decides what it is going to do. Hey, it said. Just that. A man's voice. An ordinary man's voice. Tired, friendly. The voice of a driver who has broken down and seen your truck and walked over to bum a ride or a phone or a jump. If I had heard that voice come up out of the dark on any other night of my life, I would have rolled my window down. That is what it was built to do, that voice. It was built to make me roll the window down. Hey, you awake up there? It said. Man, am I glad to see you. I've been broke down back there a couple hours. You got a phone that works? Mine's dead as a hammer. I did not answer. I sat in the dark, and I did not answer, and I did not move, and I heard it shift its weight down there, the boot grit on the concrete, and it tried again, patient, still friendly. But there was a thing coming into the friendly now, a thinness, like paint going on too thin so the wood shows through. Come on, man. It's cold out here. I ain't gonna hurt you. Just need to make a call. Roll it down a crack. I can see you sitting up there. And that was the wrong thing to say, because it was dark in my cab. I had killed every light. and there was no way a man standing on the ground below my door could see me sitting up in the blackness behind the tinted glass. No way. And yet it knew I was sitting up. It knew I was awake. It knew the same way the voice on the radio had known about the 11 years, from somewhere that was not eyes. I reached over, slow, and I pushed the lock down on the passenger door with 2 fingers, and I heard the click, and outside, right under my window, the breathing stopped. The quiet stretched. I counted it. I have always counted things when I am scared, mile markers, seconds, my own breaths. It is a thing I do. And I counted 1, 2, 3, up past 30, and nothing breathed and nothing moved, and I began to let myself think it had gone, that maybe it really had been a man, a live man, a stranded driver who had gotten spooked by my not answering and walked off. At 41, it laughed. Not down by the door. Up, level with my window, level with my face, on the other side of a 1/4 inch of glass, at the height of a head that had no business being that high, because the ground was 4 feet down and there was nothing to stand on, no step, no rock, nothing. And yet the laugh came from right there beside my head, soft and low and delighted, the laugh of somebody who has been let in on a good joke. And then the voice came again, and it was not friendly anymore, and it was not tired, and it was not quite a man's. 41, it said. I heard you counting. You always count? I want to tell you what the fear did to my body, because a man ought to tell the truth about that part, and most men never do, and the truth is that it went to my hands. My hands quit. I reached for the key, to try the engine, to try anything, and my right hand, the one with the old scar that aches in the cold, would not close on the key. It buzzed. It hung in the air between me and the column, shaking, my fingers spread and stiff, and I looked at my own hand in the dark like it belonged to somebody else, and I could not make it do the one thing I needed it to do, which was turn a key I had turned 1,000,000 times. You don't want to start it, the voice said, close, patient, reading me. It won't start. I fixed that. Roll the window down. I got my hand back. I put it in my lap, and I held it with the other one, like you would hold a hurt animal, and I looked straight ahead through the windshield at the dim orange light on the pole, and the weeds in the scale seams, and the fence, and the desert, and I did not roll the window down, and I did not say a word, and it went on talking to me, from right outside the glass, for a long time. I am not going to write down everything it said. Some of it I have made myself forget, and the forgetting cost me, and I am not going to pay for it again by digging it back up. But I will tell you the shape of it, because the shape is the part that matters. The shape is how it worked. It started with kindness. It told me it understood. It told me the road was hard, and a man got lonely, and there was no shame in it. It told me it had been watching me a long time, longer than that night, that it had seen me at the fuel islands and the rest areas and the long empty stretches where a man's face goes slack because he thinks nobody is looking, and that it knew me, that it knew the sadness in me, the way I ate alone and slept alone and drove alone and called my daughter on Sundays and lay in the bunk after and stared at the roof of the cab. It said all of this in the friendly voice, the stranded driver voice, and every word of it was true, and that was the horror of it, that it had gone through me like a man goes through another man's wallet, and it had found every true thing, and it was laying the true things out on the ground in front of me, one at a time, to show me it had them. Then, when I did not answer, it changed voices. This is the part I have the hardest time with. This is the part I have never told anybody, not my daughter, not the doctor they made me see after, nobody. It changed voices, and the voice it changed into was my brother's. My brother died in 2009. He was younger than me, 4 years younger, and he went the way a lot of men in my family go. His heart, on a Tuesday, at his kitchen table, with a cup of coffee, getting cold in front of him, and the radio on. I was in Elko when they called me. I did not make it back for 2 days, because I had a load, and I could not just drop a load, and I have carried that for a long time. that my brother lay in a funeral home for 2 days, waiting on me because I would not leave a trailer full of somebody's boxes. We had talked on the phone the Sunday before. That was the last of him I got, his voice on the phone, and I did not save it. There was nothing to save. It was just a call. And I have wished 1,000 times I had some way to hear him again. And the thing outside my truck gave him back to me. "It's all right," it said, in his voice, his exact voice, the little rasp he had, the way he came down soft on the ends of words. "It's all right, big brother. You couldn't have made it back in time. Nobody could have. I never blamed you for that. You hear me? I never blamed you. Roll the window down and I'll tell you the rest. There's things I never got to tell you." I put my hands over my ears like a child. I am a grown man. I was 51 years old. I had buried a brother and a marriage, and I had faced down black ice and blowouts, and one time a man with a knife at a truck stop in Barstow. And I sat in the dark of my cab with my hands over my ears, and my eyes shut and tears running down into my collar, because the worst thing that has ever happened to me was not the fear. It was the wanting. It knew I wanted my brother back. It had found that too. And it held him up outside my window like a lure on a line, and it reeled. Slow, patient, and part of me, God help me, part of me wanted to roll the window down. Part of me had my hand halfway to the crank before I knew it was moving. That is when I remembered the old man by the ice machine. Don't stop for it. He had known. However, he had known, and he had tried to tell me one true thing, and I had put him out of my mind before I cleared second gear. Don't stop for it. And I understood, sitting there with my hands over my ears and my dead brother's voice coming through the glass, that the whole night had been the it stopping for me, and that the only thing I had left, the only card I had not thrown, was to not stop for it back, to not answer, to not roll the window down, to not give it the one thing it could not take, which was my saying yes. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started to pray. Not out loud, I did not have the voice, but in my head, the old words, the ones my grandmother put in me before I was old enough to keep them out, and I do not know if it was the words or just the turning of my mind away, the deciding not to listen, but the brother's voice cut off in the middle of a sentence like a radio unplugged. And for a moment there was nothing, and then it screamed. I cannot describe the scream, and I am not going to try. I know a man who calls a thing indescribable is mostly telling you he did not want to do the work, and maybe that is fair, but there are sounds. The human throat is not built to make, and there are sounds no throat is built to make. And this was the second kind, and it went on too long, longer than a breath, longer than 3 breaths. One continuous sound of rage right outside the glass, and the truck rocked. The whole truck, 80,000 pounds of rig and load, and it rocked on its springs like something had hit it or grabbed it or leaned its whole weight against the side of it. And then the sound went up and over the top of the cab, across the roof, boots or claws or hands. I could hear it moving across the metal roof of my own truck above my head, and then down the other side, and it was at the passenger window, and I heard the handle move. I had locked it. I had locked both doors. The handle moved anyway, up and down, testing, and then it stopped, and there was a long scrape down the passenger door, slow, deliberate, the sound of something being drawn down the metal, and then quiet. That was when I went for the pistol. I told you I would tell you why I did not use it, and here it is. My hand went back over the seat to the bunk, under the mattress edge, and my fingers found the grip, and I got it out, and I brought it around into my lap, both hands on it. And the weight of it in my hands was the first thing all night that had felt like it belonged to the world I knew, cold and heavy and solid, a thing men made, a thing that worked the way things are supposed to work, and I nearly wept from the plain relief of holding it. I thumbed the safety off. I got it pointed low at the passenger door, where the handle had moved, and I sat there with it, and I waited, and the longer I waited, the more the relief drained back out of me, because I understood, sitting there in the dark with a loaded gun in my hands, that I did not have anything to point it at. I want to be careful here. because this is the center of it. It was not that I was afraid to shoot. I would have emptied that magazine into the door and been glad to do it. It was that there was nothing on the other side of the door that a bullet was for. I thought about the fence, the 4 strands of wire it had crossed without touching. I thought about the median, the flat graded ground with no cover, where it stood up out of nothing. I thought about the desert running level with my cab at 80. I thought about my brother's voice, my brother who I had helped carry to a hole in the ground in Oklahoma, coming through the glass soft on the ends of the words. And I understood that whatever was out there was not made of the kind of thing a gun ends, and that if I fired, all I would do is put 9 rounds through my own truck and blow out my own windows, the glass, the only thing standing between me and it, the one thing it had been trying all night to get me to open, and that if I put a hole in that glass with my own hand, I would have done its work for it. It wanted the glass open. Any hole would do. I understood that a bullet hole would do. So I put the safety back on. I laid the pistol on the seat beside me where I could reach it, because a man does not put the last hard thing down all the way. But I took my hands off of it, and I have thought 100 times since that setting that gun down was the single smartest thing I have ever done, and that it went against everything in me to do it, and that most men would not have, and that most men who ran that road and did not come back the same, or did not come back at all, I think a lot of them had a gun in their hands at the end, and I think that is exactly how it got them, by making them break their own glass. I sat back against the door, and then, in the windshield, in the dim orange wash of the pole light, it let me see a piece of it. Just a piece. It came up in front of the truck, out of the low ground, past the scales, and it did not come all the way into the light. It stopped at the edge of it, where the orange went to gray, and it stood there and let the edge of the light find the edge of it, and I could not make it hold still in my eyes. That is the closest I can come. It was a shape that my eyes kept trying to finish and could not. Tall, too tall, hunched down on itself like it was folded up to fit under a low ceiling that was not there, and where the light caught it there was hide, gray and matted coyote hide, but stretched wrong. Stretched over a frame it did not fit, the way a tarp sits wrong over a load that is the wrong shape under it. And up top there was the head, the coyote head, hanging forward and down off a neck that was too long and too upright, a man's height of neck under a dog's skull, and the ears were up, listening, turning, and under the edge of the hide, where it should have been more coyote, there was an arm. There was an arm, thin and long and pale, where the hide did not cover it, and it hung down past where a foreleg ends, past the knee that was not a knee, down, and at the end of it there was a hand. And the hand was almost right. That is the thing I have never been able to shake out of the whole night. That is the image that comes up out of the dark when I close my eyes at the wrong time. Not that the hand was a claw or a talon or some made-up movie thing. That it was a hand, a human hand, long-fingered, and that it was almost right. That whatever wore that hide had gotten a hand nearly the way a hand goes and had missed by the smallest amount. One joint too many in the fingers. The thumb set a hair too low, so that it was a hand you would shake and only feel the wrongness of after, once it had you. Then it lifted the hand, slow, into the last of the light, and it turned it over, palm up, and it opened the fingers, all of them, the too many joints unfolding, and it held the hand out flat toward me across the hood of the truck. Palm up, open, the way you hold a hand out to a dog you want to come to you, the way the old man by the ice machine had held his hand up flat, and it waited, and I did not move, and after a while it drew the hand back into the dark, and the piece of it I had seen folded down and was gone, and the windshield was empty again, and I sat there and shook, and did not know how long I sat there. I do not know how long I sat there. I told you the fear does something to time, and it does. It takes it away from you, and when I came back to myself, the dash clock said 2:17 in the morning, and I had lost an hour and a half that I have never gotten back. I do not know what happened in that hour and a half. I have thought about it more than anything else, and I do not know. I was in the same position, my back against the door, my knees drawn up, my hands in my lap. I had not moved. Or I had moved and did not remember it. Either way, there was a hole in the night the shape of an hour and a half, and I have never wanted to fill it in, because I do not think I would like what is in it. At 2:17 the tapping started. It was on the windshield. Just a tap. One finger. One tap. On the glass right in front of me. Then a pause. Then 2 taps. Then a pause. Then 3. Counting. It was counting for me the way I count, showing me it had learned it, and it went up 4, 5, 6, patient, 1 tap at a time, and I stared at the windshield in the dim orange light, and I could not see anything out there, nothing. The apron was empty, the scales were empty, there was nothing standing in front of my truck, and the taps kept coming out of the empty air, 7, 8, 9. At 9 it stopped, and a voice said, right against the glass, in the old man's voice now, the Navajo man from the ice machine, low and sad, I told you not to stop for it. And I have never known, from that night to this one, whether that was the thing wearing the old man the way it had worn the coyote and the stranded driver and my brother, or whether it was the old man himself, dead now maybe, or worse than dead, taken like it was trying to take me, made to walk out into the dark and say the one true thing over and over to men in trucks who would not listen. I do not know. I have decided I do not want to know. Some doors you leave shut. The last hour was the worst, and it was the worst because it went soft. The screaming was easier than what came at the end. Toward the end it stopped trying to break me with fear, and it went back to kindness. And it worked its way through all of them again, one at a time, patient, the stranded driver, and the old man and my brother, and then it found new ones. And this is the part I have never said out loud to anybody living. It found my daughter. It put her voice against the glass, grown, tired, the voice I had heard on the phone that very Sunday, and it said, Daddy. It said, Daddy, I need you to open the door. And I sat there with my hands over my ears, and I said inside my own head, over and over, you are not her, you are not her. She is safe in her bed in Tulsa. You do not have her. You only have the sound of her, and I do not know to this day if that was true, if she was safe, if it only had the sound, and I have never asked her about that night, and I never will, because if she tells me nothing strange happened to her that night, I will believe her and be glad. And if she tells me she woke at 2:17 in the morning with no reason and could not get back to sleep, I do not think I could stand it. Then it found the last one. It went small. It went high. It put a child's voice against the glass. A little girl counting 1, 2, 3, 4, the way my granddaughter counts, except my granddaughter was not born yet. She would not be born for 2 more years. So it could not have had her. It could only have reached forward somehow into a thing that had not happened and taken the shape of it. And I did not understand that then. I only understood it later, when she was 3 and started counting the stairs out loud, and the bottom fell out of me in the middle of my own daughter's kitchen. That night, at the scale house, I only heard a child counting where there was no child, and it was the last thing it tried, and it counted up, slow, 1 number at a time, and I knew, the way you know the shape of a hill you cannot see in the dark, that it was counting towards something, that when it reached the number it was counting to, it was going to be done being patient. So I counted with it in my head, against it, and I got ahead of it, and I was praying and counting both at once, and I do not know what number it was climbing to, because it never got there, because the sky went gray. I sat in that truck until the sky went gray. That is the part nobody believes. That a thing like that could be beaten by nothing more than a man sitting still and refusing to answer until the sun came up. But I think now that is exactly the size of it. That it was never going to break the glass, that it could not break the glass, that the whole of its power was in getting me to open the door myself, to say yes, to stop for it. And when the light came up in the east over the desert, slow, the way it does, the stars going out one at a time and then all at once, and the orange pole light snapping off on its timer, and the first real color coming back into the world, the weeds green in the scale seams, and the block building gray, and the fence just a fence. I turned the key, and the engine started on the first try like there had never been a thing wrong with it. And there was not. They checked it later, top to bottom, and there was never a thing wrong with that engine. I drove to the big truck stop with the sun coming up behind me, and I parked in the middle of all those trucks under the last of the mercury lights, and I sat in the diner and I drank coffee I could not taste with my hands wrapped around the cup to keep them still. And a waitress named Dolores, who I had seen 100 times, asked me if I was all right, and I said I was fine, I was just tired. And she said, "Honey, you look like you seen a ghost." And I laughed, and it came out wrong, and she went away and left me alone. There was a scrape down the passenger door of my truck, a long one, from the top of the door to the bottom, through the paint and into the metal, 4 lines of it, close together, the way 4 fingers would sit on a hand if the hand was too big and if the fingers were too long. The shop said it was probably a low branch or a fence post. There is not a tree for 40 miles of where I was parked, and there was no fence within reach of that truck. I had them buff it out anyway. You could still see it if you knew where to look. I sold the truck 8 months later, and I did not tell the man who bought it about the marks, and I have felt bad about that, a little, but not bad enough to have called him. I did not drive that lane again. I asked for the northern runs after that, up through Denver and Cheyenne and across Wyoming, and I told my dispatcher it was my knees, the mountains, that I wanted flatter, and he did not ask. Dispatchers do not ask. And I ran the North Country for 2 more years, and then I hung it up. I am home now. I have a little place outside of Tulsa, close to my daughter, close to my granddaughter, who is 7, and who thinks I hung the moon, and who I will not let out of my sight after dark. And my daughter thinks that is sweet, and I let her think it. I sleep with a light on. I am too old to be ashamed of it. I park my car facing the road, every time, in the driveway, at the store, everywhere, nose out, and I do not fully know why, except that some part of me still wants to be able to see a thing coming, and to be able to leave without backing up, without that one moment of turning around. My granddaughter counts things. She counts the stairs when she goes up, the peas on her plate, the cars that go by, out loud, in her high little voice, 1, 2, 3. And every time she does it, something goes cold in the middle of me, and I have to leave the room, and my daughter thinks I am going to get a drink of water, and I let her think that too. Last Sunday my phone rang. It was late, past 11, and the number on the screen was one I did not know, out of area, and I let it go to the machine. I always let the late ones go now. And after it beeped, there was a long stretch of nothing, just an open line, a little hiss, the sound of a lot of empty air, the sound of the long empty out past the last light of a town, and then, right at the end, before it clicked off, soft, close, a little rasp on it, coming down easy on the ends of the words. My brother's voice said, "It's all right, big brother." I saved it. I did not delete it. I have not listened to it again. I keep the light on, and I park facing the road, and on Sundays I do not answer the phone, and I have not driven west of Amarillo in 9 years, and I do not intend to. Not for any load, not for any money, not ever again. The desert can keep the desert. There is a thing out there that stops for men on the long empty roads, that wears whatever it needs to wear, the coyote and the stranded driver and the man you loved and buried, and it is patient, and it has all the time there is. And it is still out there, past the last light, waiting on the next set of headlights to slow down. Do not slow down. That is the one true thing I have to give, the way the old man gave it to me, and I do not expect it to do any more good in your ears than it did in mine. But I said it, and now it is yours. And out here, in the small hours, with the light on, and the road in front of the house gone quiet and pale, that is the only thing I have found that helps it all. To have said it, to have told somebody, to hold it up flat like a man taking an oath, or like a man telling a truck to stop and to let it go. What came down from Lookout 7, The keys were in her car, and the driver door was open, and the dome light had been on long enough to kill the battery, which is how I knew before anybody said a word that this one was going to be bad. It was parked crooked at the Trail 217 trailhead, a little gray Subaru with a coexist sticker and a lot of Oregon dust, and it was cold. Not engine cold, night cold. It had been sitting since the day before at least, and it was already going on 4 in the afternoon when we rolled in. I put my hand on the hood the way you do. Nothing. Cold as the gravel. My name is Del Ackerman, and I ran a planer at the mill in Prineville for 31 years before my knee gave out and they gave me a clock and a handshake. After that I had too much day and not enough to put in it, so I signed on with the county search and rescue, which is mostly old men and a couple of ranch kids, and one nurse named Patty who is worth the rest of us put together. We find lost hunters. We find hikers who took the wrong fork off the loop and burned their phone battery trying to get a bar. Twice a year we find somebody who is not lost anymore in the way that matters, and you learn to tell which kind of call it is by little things. The cold hood, the open door, the dome light that ran a battery flat because whoever got out of that car meant to come right back. Her name was Dana Reyes, 26 years old, a school teacher out of Bend, and she had told her roommate she was going up to do the Trail 217 loop, which is a nothing hike, 8 miles, a couple of good overlooks, back by dark. The roommate called it in when Dana did not come home and did not answer and did not post any of the pictures she always posted. The county pinged her phone and got one last hit off the tower on Cinder Butte the afternoon before, and then nothing. That tower has a long reach. Nothing after that could mean her phone died. It could mean she went down into the drainage where there is no signal. It could mean a lot of things, and most of them are fine, and I have learned not to say the ones that are not. I want to tell you a little about myself before I tell you the rest, because the man who tells you this matters, and because I have read enough of these kinds of accounts to know that the first thing a reasonable person wants to know is whether the fellow telling it is the kind who sees things. I am not. I will say that plainly. I am a Lutheran who goes twice a year, Christmas and the other one, and I could not tell you a thing about my own religion, let alone anybody else's. I have never seen a ghost. I do not believe my house is haunted, and I do not knock on wood. And when my daughter went through her phase of tarot cards in high school, I told her it was a way for a company in China to take her allowance, and I still think that. I have hunted these mountains since I was 9 years old, walking behind my father, and I have spent more nights alone in the woods than most men have spent in their own beds, and the woods never scared me, not once. Not in 50 years. The dark is just the dark. An elk bugle in the black timber will lift you out of your boots the first time, and then you learn it and it never touches you again. That is the man I was going up that trail. I am setting it down so that when I tell you what I saw, you will know it was seen by a man who spent his whole life not seeing things, and who would give a great deal to go back to being him. My wife is named Carol, and we have been married 34 years, and she is the reason I came down off that mountain, which I will get to. My daughter is Erin. She is a labor and delivery nurse at a hospital in Portland. She brings new people into the world for a living, and I mention her now because the thing up there used her, or something near enough to her that my body could not tell the difference, and you should know she was real and she was mine before I tell you how it used her. We staged at the trailhead, 6 of us that first evening, plus the deputy, a young one named Cordero, who mostly stayed by his truck and ran the radio. The incident number they gave it was Incident 4412, and I remember that because Patty wrote it on the back of her hand in ballpoint like she always does. And I remember looking at those 4 numbers on her freckled skin and thinking it was a small hike, and we would have this girl wrapped in a blanket and drinking cocoa out of Cordero's thermos before 10. That is the last clean thought I had about any of it. I am writing it the way it happened, so it lives somewhere besides my own head, because my head has not been a safe place to keep it. The light was already going gold and long. Late September, that high desert light that comes in sideways and turns the bark of the ponderosas the color of a rusted nail. It smelled like it always smells up there. Pine pitch and warm dust, and under that, the cold coming up out of the ground the way it does the second the sun quits. There is a particular good smell to those woods at the end of a hot day, and I mention it because that was the last evening those woods smelled only like themselves. We split into 2 teams. Patty took the nurse's kit and the ranch kid Tyler up the east side of the loop. I took the west with a man named Roy Bittner, who had been doing this longer than any of us, and a fellow I did not know well who had transferred in from Deschutes County, name of Grant. Roy was the tracker. He is the reason I want to tell this right, because Roy Bittner was the least excitable human being I ever stood next to. A retired brand inspector, 70 years old, hands like cured leather, and by the end of that night, Roy Bittner would not get out of the truck, and I need you to understand what kind of man that took. We found her first footprints inside the first quarter mile. The trail up the west side runs along a cut bank where the tread is soft, powder-fine dust that holds a print like wet cement, and there she was. A woman's hiking boot, size 7 maybe, a good clear waffle tread heading up the trail the way she'd gone. Roy crouched over it and pointed, with a pencil not touching, and said she was moving easy, not hurt, not running, a normal gait. He could tell you her weight off the depth of the heel. He said she stopped here to look at something, both feet together, turned a little toward the overlook, and then went on. It was the most ordinary thing in the world. A young woman stopping on a trail to look at a view, and it made me like her. You start to build a person out of the little things they leave. She stopped to look at the mountain. She was in no hurry. We followed her up the switchbacks in the last of the good light, Roy calling it soft over his shoulder. She stopped again here. She sat on this rock. See the scuff. She came back down onto the trail. And then, a mile and a half up, right where the trail crosses the old 2-track that used to be Forest Road 250 before they decommissioned it and let the alders take it, Roy stopped and stood up straight and put his hands on his hips and looked at the ground for a long time without saying anything. What? I said. She met somebody, Roy said. There was a second set of prints in the 2-track. They came out of the trees on the uphill side, crossed the road, and fell in behind hers heading up the loop. Bare feet. I want to be careful here because this is the first thing that was wrong, and I did not know yet that it was wrong. I thought I did. I thought some barefoot hippie kid, some Vision Quest type, we get them up here, and I said as much, and Roy did not answer me. Which I did not think anything of at the time, because Roy not answering was Roy's whole personality. Grant took a picture of the barefoot print with his phone. It was long. Longer than my boot, and I wear a 12. The toes were spread the way a foot spreads when it has never been in a shoe, and the arch barely marked the dust, like the foot was near flat, and there was something about the way the print sat that I could not name. A wrongness I put down to the failing light, and the fact that I was tired and had not eaten since a gas station burrito on Highway 97 at noon. Roy put down to nothing. He just looked at it, and then he looked up the trail where the 2 sets of prints went off together into the blue shadow under the trees, and he said we should get back to the trucks and wait for morning and more people. And that was the second wrong thing, except this one was Roy being wrong. Roy, who once tracked a downed elk hunter through 2 miles of lava rock in the dark because the man's daughter was crying at the trailhead. Roy Bittner did not turn around for weather, and he did not turn around for dark. But the sun was gone behind Cinder Butte, and the temperature was dropping the way it does, 10 degrees in 10 minutes, and Grant agreed with him, and my knee was singing, so we turned around. We had not gone 50 yards back down when the child started calling. It came from up the drainage, off to the northeast, thin and high, and carried on the cold air the way sound carries when the ground gives up its heat. A kid, little one, 4 or 5 years old, by the pitch of it, and it was saying, help. Just that, help, help. The word stretched out long the way a scared little kid says it, and every hair I had stood up off my arms. Cordero came over the radio almost the same second, his voice cracking with it. Base to teams, we are getting reports of a possible second subject, a minor, possibly a child. Does anybody copy a voiceover? I keyed my radio. My mouth had gone dry and metallic, like I'd been sucking on a nickel. West team copies a voice, I said. Northeast of our position, up the drainage. Sounds like a little kid. Do not, Roy said. He had his hand on my arm. Grant was already 3 steps up the slope toward the sound with his flashlight coming on, and Roy said, "Do not," again, louder, and Grant stopped and turned around with this look on his face like Roy had slapped him. "There's a kid up there," Grant said. "There's no kid up here," Roy said. "There was never any report of a kid. 1 woman, 1 hiker. Reyes. You heard Cordero, he said reports. He means us. He means that." Roy pointed up the black slope, where the voice was still going, "Help, help," at the exact same interval, the exact same length. The same 3 notes over and over like a bird that only knows 1 call. "You count the time between," Roy said. "Go on, count it." And I did. God help me, I stood there in the dark and counted, and he was right. Every time. The same gap, the same word, the same length, the same little upward hitch at the end. A scared child does not do that. A scared child speeds up and slows down and sobs and stops to breathe and screams your way when it hears you coming. This did not change when we made noise. It did not come toward the flashlight. It stayed exactly where it was and said help on a timer, and the more I listened, the more it stopped sounding like a word and started sounding like something that had heard the word once and was doing an impression of it. "It's an animal," Grant said. His voice had gone up. "Fox. It's a fox. They sound like people. They sound like women screaming." "Sure," Roy said, and started down the trail. "It's a fox. I have hunted these mountains my whole life, and I have heard a fox scream, and it will freeze the blood in you the first time. But a fox does not say help." And Roy Bittner knew what a fox was better than any of us. And Roy Bittner had just agreed that it was a fox, and started walking away from it as fast as his old legs would carry him. And that is the moment, if I am honest, that is the exact moment the night changed for me. When the man who knew everything agreed with the easy answer and ran. We came off the trail into the trailhead in full dark. Patty's team was already back. She had found Dana's tracks too, on the east side, and here is a thing I did not put together until much later. Dana Reyes could not have made both sets. The loop is 8 miles. Her east prints and her west prints were laid down the same evening by the depth and the weather in them, Roy said so later, and you do not walk a loop in both directions at once. Somebody wanted us to find her going every way there was. Somebody wanted us up in there, spread out, in the dark, calling her name. I did not think about any of that yet. Yet is a word I have learned to hate. Cordero wanted to push through the night. That is protocol. When a subject is exposed, and the temperature is dropping, and hypothermia is on the table, and Dana Reyes had been out at least 1 night already in a fleece and a day pack. But Roy took the deputy aside by his truck, and I do not know everything Roy said to him. I only caught pieces, because Roy talked low. But I caught him say, "We do not have the people," and I caught him say, "Not with a child call, we cannot confirm." And I caught, at the very end, Roy Bittner say a word I did not expect to hear out of him, which was please. Roy said, "Please, Sheriff, wait for the sun." And Cordero, who was 25 years old and out of his depth, and could see that the oldest, steadiest man on his team had gone the color of the moon, called it for the night. We would stage back at first light with the county's full call-out, air support if the budget cleared it, dogs from La Pine. We drove out down Forest Road, 250 in a line, 3 trucks, headlights swinging through the trunks. And a mile down, right where the road crosses the creek at the culvert, my headlights came across the tracks in the dust of the road, and I slowed. And Roy, who was riding with me, said, "Don't stop, Del," and I did not stop. But I saw them. They came out of the creek bottom on 4 legs. A big animal, deer-sized. The prince staggered in a walking gait, cloven, like a mule deer. And I thought deer, of course, a deer crossed the road. And then in the middle of the road, in the space of 1 stride, the 4 legs became 2. The cloven prince stopped, and a set of those long, bare human feet went on up the far bank, upright, walking like a man, and there was no scuffle in between, no place where a thing got up onto its hind legs. 1 print was a deer's. The next print, 18 inches on The length of one step was a foot, as if it had not changed so much as remembered, halfway across the road, that it was supposed to be walking on two. I have gone over that 18 inches of road 1,000 times since. That is the thing that will not leave me, more than the tower, more than any of it, that little piece of ground in my own headlights where a deer's track became a man's between one step and the next. Because a track is a document. Roy taught me that, standing over Dana's first blueprint. A track is a document, and a document cannot lie. The ground writes down exactly what stood on it and nothing else. And the ground had written down a thing that walked into the light of my truck on 4 legs and out of it on 2, and did not stop to change in between. There was no lie in it, and there was no explanation in it. It was just true, the way a broken bone is true, and I drove past it, doing 40 on a bad road because Roy told me not to stop, and because some part of me, older than my thinking part, knew that stopping was the last thing I would ever do. "Don't stop," Roy said again, though I hadn't, and I put my eyes back on the road and I drove, and behind us in the dark the child up the drainage was still saying help, 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 fainter now, and perfectly evenly spaced. We came down onto the pavement of Highway 97, and the world turned back into the world. Gas station lights, a cattle truck going north. Roy did not say anything the whole way down, except once, near the bottom, without me asking. He said his grandmother was Dene, Navajo, from down near Chinle, and that she had told him things when he was a boy that he had spent his whole life not believing, and that he was too old to start being a fool now, and that we should have never called that girl's name out loud up there in the dark. Calling a name, he said, is an invitation. Then he shut his mouth and did not open it again, and I dropped him at his truck at the county barn, and we did not talk about the deer that stood up. I did not sleep. I lay in my bed in my house in Prineville with the light on, and I listened to my own furnace tick, and I told myself all the things you tell yourself. A prankster with a speaker. Some backcountry lunatic on foot. A trick of soft ground and bad light. I am a practical man. I have wired a house and rebuilt a transmission, and set a broken finger with a popsicle stick. I do not believe in things. By 4 in the morning I had it mostly talked back down into the world of the explainable, and I got up and made coffee in the dark and drove back up to meet the full call out, because a girl was still out there. And whatever else was true, that was true. Morning made it worse. That is the thing nobody tells you. You think the sun fixes it, and the sun only shows you more. By 9 we had 30 people at the trailhead, and 2 dog teams, and a bird up out of Redmond doing grid over the drainage. In daylight, with all those people, and all those radios, and the good hard smell of coffee and 2-stroke exhaust from the ranger's saw, it seemed impossible that I had watched a deer stand up and turn into a man. I had almost decided I hadn't, and then the dogs would not go up the trail. They were good dogs, big shepherds. A handler named Bev, who had been doing this 20 years, and they came off the trucks all business, tails going, and Bev scented them off one of Dana's shirts, and they hit the trail hot, and about a quarter mile up, right around where Roy had found the first clear prints, both dogs quit at the same time, not tired, not confused. They put their tails down and their ears back, and they turned around and pushed at Bev's legs to get back down the trail, and one of them, the male, was making a sound I have never heard a dog make, a high, thin whine way back in his throat, and he would not stop looking up the trail, backing down it, whining, watching. Bev worked them for 20 minutes and got nowhere, and finally walked them back to her truck and put them in their boxes, and I saw her hands were shaking when she lit her cigarette, and Bev did not strike me as a woman whose hands shook. Roy did not come back that morning. He called Cordero and said he was sick, and everybody figured 70-year-old man, cold night, fair enough. But I had his cell number, and I called it standing behind my truck where nobody could hear me, and he picked up on the first ring like he'd been holding the phone. "You saw it too," I said. There was a long quiet on the line. I could hear a TV going somewhere in his house. Then Roy said, "Del, listen to me. You go up there today, because that girl is somebody's daughter, and you cannot not go. I know that. I'm the same. But you do your grid, and you come down before the sun gets behind the butte. You do not stay up there past dark. You do not answer anything that calls you by your name. And whatever you do not let it get you off by yourself. He stopped. It's already got the girl. I'm sorry, but it has. What's up there now isn't looking for her. It's wearing her. Then he hung up, and I stood there with the phone hot against my ear. And up the mountain, the bird went droning back and forth over the trees. And I told myself that Roy Bittner was an old man who had gotten a scare and let his dead grandmother's stories get into him. And I got my pack, and I went up with the rest of them. Because a girl was somebody's daughter, which was the only true thing left standing. We gridded the west drainage all day. 30 people, arm's length apart, walking a slope. And it is hard, ugly work. Deadfall and blowdown and stobs that take your shins off. And by 2 in the afternoon, we had turned up exactly one thing. And the one thing was hers. It was a boot. A woman's hiking boot, size 7, the waffle tread that had made all those prints, sitting upright and neat in the middle of a little open bench under the big pines, laces still tied. Just the one. Tied. Set down careful and level like somebody had placed it there for us to find, toe pointed downhill, laces done up in a double knot. There is no way to take a lace boot off a foot without untying it. You cannot. Try it. And there it sat, tied, alone. No sign of the other one, no drag, no blood, no sign of her at all, in the exact center of a clearing where you could see 200 feet in every direction, like the middle of a stage. I was the one who found it. I called it in, and I flagged it, and I stood over it, while the deputy and the crime tech came up, and I looked at the ground around it while I waited, the way Roy would have. And this is the part I have never told anybody. Not Cordero, not my wife, nobody, and I am writing it down now. There were prints around the boot, bare feet, the long spread-toed kind. They came up to the boot and stopped, all around it, close, the way you would stand looking down at something you had set on the ground. But there was no track coming in and no track going out. The bare prints were only there, in a ring, around that boot, in the middle of the clearing, and the dust of the clearing. Everywhere else was smooth and unbroken. 200 feet of soft-holding dust in every direction, and nothing crossed it, as though whatever stood there and set that boot down and admired it had not walked in and had not walked out. Had only for a while been there and then not. I did not say anything about the prince. I have thought 1,000 times about why not, and the truth is small and shameful. I did not want to be the man who said it. I did not want 30 people looking at me. So I stood on them. I stood on the prints while the tech photographed the boot, and I scuffed my own boots around like a nervous old man, and I ruined them. And when the tech asked me to step back, I had already put my size 12s over every one of those long bare feet. I have to live with that. There were people up there with me, and I made sure nobody else saw the thing I saw, because I wanted it to not be real more than I wanted anybody to believe me. There is a thing that happens to a search when it goes on too long and turns up nothing, and I have felt it a dozen times, but never the way I felt it that afternoon. People stop talking. The line gets ragged. Somebody who was calling the subject's name every 30 seconds when we started, Dana, Dana, is not calling it anymore by 2 in the afternoon, and you notice you have gone quiet too, and you tell yourself it is, because your throat is dry. And it is not. The whole line had gone quiet, 30 people spread across the mountainside in the good light, and nobody was calling her name, and I did not understand why until I did, which was that every one of us had stopped wanting to say her name out loud in that place, the same way you stop wanting to say a thing in an empty house at night, the same animal part of you that pulls your hand back off a stove. We did not decide it. We just, all of us, quit calling for her. And there is nothing in the search and rescue manual about that. About a whole team going silent on a slope in daylight because saying a lost girl's name had started to feel like ringing a bell you would not want answered. Bev's dogs had not come back out of their boxes. I went by her truck around noon to top off my water, and the dogs were lying flat in their crates with their chins on their paws and their eyes open, both of them, not sleeping, watching the mountain through the wire. And when I came near, they did not so much as flick an ear at me, which no dog does. A dog always reads you. And these two would not take their eyes off the tree line long enough to notice a man 3 feet away. Bev sat in her cab with the door open and her feet on the running board, and she was not working. She was just sitting there. I asked her, was she going to run them again after they rested, and she looked at me for a second too long and said, "They won't take the scent, Dell." And I said, "They hit it hot this morning." And she said, "They'll take a scent. They won't take that one." And she looked back at the mountain, and I left her alone. The afternoon got long. The light started coming in sideways in gold, that same rusted nail light, and I felt it in my gut before I felt it anywhere, a loose, cold feeling, because the sun was going toward the butte, and Roy's voice was in my head, "Come down before the sun gets behind the butte." And that is when the radio said Patty's voice. I need to say this exactly. I was standing at the top of the grid with maybe 8 other people within sight of me, strung out along the bench, and Patty was one of them. Patty was 40 feet from me. Uphill, I could see her orange vest. She had her radio on her chest strap, and her hands were both down at her sides, working a granola bar out of her pocket. I was looking right at her, and my radio, on my chest, crackled and said, in Patty's voice, clear as a phone call, "Dell, Dell, come here. I found her. Come quick, I got her. She's alive. Come alone. Hurry, over." Patty's voice, her exact voice, the little rasp in it from 40 years of camels, the way she runs her words. "Come alone, hurry." And Patty was standing 40 feet uphill from me, with her radio silent on her chest and a granola bar half out of the wrapper, looking at me, because she had heard it too, come out of my radio, and out of everybody's radios all down the line, her own voice telling me to come alone. Nobody moved. 8, 9 grown men and women on a mountainside, and not one of us moved or breathed. I looked at Patty, and Patty looked at me, and her mouth was open a little, and the granola bar dropped out of her hand, and she did not bend to get it. And the radio said it again, patient, exactly the same words in the same order. "Come alone, hurry, over," the way the child had said, "Help, help, help," on its timer. And I understood, standing there in the gold light with the cold coming up out of the ground, that Roy was right about all of it, that it did not want the girl anymore, that it had learned her, and then it had learned the boot, and then it had spent a whole day learning us, learning our voices off the radio traffic, learning our names off the way we called to each other across the grid, and that it had picked me. "Come alone, Dell." It knew which one I was. Cordero got on the radio and said, "All teams, hold your positions," in a voice that was trying so hard to be a cop's voice and was just a scared kid's voice. And then he said something that ended the search for the day. He said, "Everybody down to the trailhead now. Buddy up, nobody walks alone." And we went. 30 people came down off that mountain in a hurry, with the sun going red behind Cinder Butte, and nobody talking, and Patty walked next to me the whole way with her arm hooked through mine like we were going to a dance. And neither of us said a single word about the fact that I had just heard her call my name in her own voice while she stood there with her mouth shut. We should have all gone home. I want that on the record. Every good instinct any of us had said, get in the trucks and go down to the pavement where the world is still the world. But there was a complication, and the complication is why some of us stayed, and it is the reason I spent that night where I spent it. And I have gone over it 10,000 times, and I still do not know what the right call was. The bird had to break off at noon with a hydraulic problem, and before it did, the observer had reported a possible sighting. Something down in the bottom of the far drainage, past the decommissioned road, in the timber below Lookout 7. A shape he thought might be a person, moving near the old fire lookout tower that sits up on the point there, Cinder Butte Lookout. Lookout 7 on the district maps, staffed in fire season, empty now. The last week of September, the fire watch stood down for the year. If that was Dana, if she had made it up to the lookout and was holed up and it hurt, then leaving her a second night was leaving her to die, and Cordero could not do it, and I could not do it. And so a small team was going to go up to Lookout 7 before dark, confirm or clear it, and come back down. 4 of us. Me, because I knew that country, and I could still walk, despite the knee. Grant, the Deschutes transfer, because he was young and strong and had not learned yet to be as afraid as he should have been. A big, quiet, sour man named Willard, who had been a Marine. And Cordero, the deputy, because a deputy has to go where the evidence is, and he was not going to send us without him, which I will give him. That took something. 4 of us in 2 trucks up the far side, while everybody else pulled back to the trailhead to run comms and wait. We had maybe an hour of light when we started up. I remember thinking that was enough. Get to the lookout, clear it, get out. An hour is a long time. An hour is nothing. I have learned that both of those are true, and which one it is depends on what is in the hour with you. The road up to Lookout 7 is a bad one. A single lane cut of red cinders that switchbacks up the point with a drop on the outside that gets your attention, and it was full dark before we made the top because the road ate more time than I figured. The truck's headlights swung out over the drop into nothing on the turns, and I did not like it. I did not like being up on that exposed point with night coming. But then we came up out of the last switchback onto the flat top of the butte, and there was the lookout standing up against the last green light in the west, and for 1 second it was the most welcome thing I ever saw. A fire lookout is a little glass house on stilts. 14 feet of open steel legs, and then a cab, glass on all 4 sides, a catwalk running around the outside, and a steep stair going up. Cinder Butte Lookout is an air motor tower built in the 1930s by the CCC boys, and it has stood up there through 90 winters, and I thought, if that girl is anywhere alive up here, she is up in that cab where she can see, and there is light, there is a wood stove, there is a radio. We swept it with the headlights and the truck spots, and it was dark and still. No light in the cab. The door at the top of the stair was shut. We got out, and the second my boots hit the cinders, I knew we were alone up there in the way that a place tells you, and I knew that Dana Reyes was not in that tower, and I knew we should get back in the trucks. And I did not say it, because Grant was already at the bottom of the stair calling her name up into the dark. Dana Reyes, County Search and Rescue. And his voice went up into the cab and did not come back, and the last of the green went out of the west, and the stars came on hard the way they do up high with no town for 60 miles, and it got cold. The dry kind. The kind that cracks your lips and pulls the water out of your eyes. We went up, all 4 of us, up the steel stair, our boots ringing on the treads, and Cordero had the key from the district office, and the cab was empty. Of course it was empty. A cot with a bear-striped mattress rolled up. A little wood stove, cold, and I opened it and put my hand in, and it was cold ash and had been cold a long time. A table with the Osborne firefinder bolted to the center of it, that brass instrument they used to shoot a bearing on a smoke, a ring of degrees around a map with 2 sights you look through, a logbook, a wall of windows going black, and the 4 of us reflected in them, 4 scared men with headlamps floating in the dark over the whole county. Nobody's been here, Willard said. He was right. Dust on the sills. No boot. No girl. The observer had seen something moving down the timber, and it had not been Dana Reyes coming up to safety. It had been something else, moving toward the one lit-up structure on the whole mountain. And we had just driven up and turned on every light we had and stood in a glass box on 14-foot legs and shouted her name into the night, and I understood all at once, standing in that cab, exactly what we had done. We had rung the dinner bell. We had done the one thing. We had come up here alone, the 4 of us, off by ourselves, away from the 30 people at the trailhead, and we had called a name into the dark. And we were up in a glass box you could see from every direction with one road down. We need to go, I said, right now. Back in the trucks. That was when the first truck's alarm went off down below us, the panic honk, headlights flashing, that sound a key fob makes. except nobody had the fob out. All 4 fobs were in that cab with us. And we looked down through the black glass, and Cordero's Tahoe was sitting down there on the cinders with its lights going and its horn blatting into the night all by itself, and then it stopped. Just stopped. And in the ringing quiet after it stopped, from the timber at the edge of the flat, a voice said, "County Search and Rescue. Dana Reyes. Are you up there?" It was Grant's voice. It was Grant's exact voice, the words he had called up the stairs 10 minutes before, played back at us out of the tree line, and Grant was standing right next to me with all the blood gone out of his face, and he had not said a word. Nobody moved. We stood in the glass cab in the beams of our own headlamps, and I reached over slow and clicked mine off and said, "Low, lights, turn them off." And one by one the headlamps went out, and we stood in the dark in the glass box, 4 men, and outside the stars were enough to see the shape of the land, the black points of the trees, the pale cinders below, and nothing moved down there, nothing at all. And then Grant's voice came again from a different place, from the other side of the tower now, from the north. "Are you up there? Are you up there? Come alone. Hurry." It was stitching our sentences together. It had Grant's calling of the name, and it had my "come alone" from the radio that afternoon, and it was sewing them into new sentences and getting them almost right, almost the rhythm of a real person. But not quite. The words a half beat too even, no breath between them, the same flatness the child had, the same flatness the boot had, sitting tied in the dust. Approximate. It had gotten us nearly right. That was the whole of the horror of it, and I did not have a word for it then, and I am not sure I have one now. It was not that it sounded like a monster. It was that it sounded almost exactly like us, and the almost was a cold place you could fall into forever. Cordero got on his radio to call the trailhead, and the radio gave him back a burst of static, and then, in the static, Patty's voice saying, "Come alone. Hurry. Over." Our own dead air talking to us and the voices it had stolen, and Cordero dropped the radio like it was hot. It swung on its cord. And down below, from directly under the tower now, from the base of the stairs, something put its weight on the first steel tread, and the whole tower rang with it, one soft, deep note, the way a tower rings when a person starts to climb. Then the second tread. Then the third. "The trap door," Willard said. "There is a hatch in the floor of the cab that the stair comes up through, and a door that folds down over it, and Willard already had it. He was folding the heavy door down over the top of the stair, and throwing the barrel bolt, and it was a good bolt, a real one, and I do not think for 1 second that it would have held if the thing on the stairs had wanted to come up, but it came halfway, and it stopped. We heard it stop. It stood on the stair in the dark under our feet, and the tower quit ringing, and it was so quiet I could hear Grant breathing through his mouth next to me, and hear Cordero's radio still hissing on its cord, and hear, under all of it, the little tick of the cold metal in the legs of the tower contracting in the night air, and I thought, this is it, this is the whole world now, this cold glass box, and everything else is gone. And then it started talking, and it talked all night. I am going to try to set down what that night was, and I already know I am going to fail, because words on a page have a shape, and that night did not have a shape. It just went on and on, hour after hour, and the human mind is not built to hold that many hours of it, and mine has been dropping pieces ever since, which is a mercy and a theft at the same time. It went around and around the tower. On the ground first, we could hear its feet in the cinders, and then up on the catwalk, which meant it had come up the outside somehow, up the steel legs, and it walked the catwalk around the glass. Slow, unhurried, and we could not see it, because to see it we would have had to put our faces near the glass, and none of us would do that, none of us. So we sat in the middle of the cab floor, the 4 of us, backs together in a little knot on the bare boards, with the firefinder over us on its table, and we listened to it walk around and around us on the catwalk in the dark, its feet slapping soft on the boards, that long, flat, barefooted slap, and every so often it stopped at a window and looked in, and you could feel it looking in even without seeing it, the way you can feel a hand held near your skin without it touching, and it talked. It used all our voices. It had them all by then. It said, in Cordero's voice, "Base to teams. We are getting reports of a possible second subject." It said, in my voice, my own voice, God hearing your own voice come out of the dark saying words you said. It said, "Cold as the gravel," and I did not know where it had that. And then I remembered I had said it out loud with my hand on the hood of Dana's car, "Cold as the gravel," and it had been listening even then. It had been there the whole time, from the very first hour, from the parking lot. It had been standing in the trees learning us since before we ever started up the trail. It said Dana's roommate's name, which none of us had ever spoken, which was not in any radio traffic, which it could only have gotten one way. And late, in the deepest part of the night, it stopped using our voices, and it used a child's voice, the same help from the first evening, and then it changed the child's voice, and it started saying, in that little 4-year-old's voice, "Help, Daddy," and my whole body went to ice, because I have a daughter. She is grown now. She is a nurse in Portland, but she was 4 once. And it said, "Help, Daddy," in a voice that was not my daughter's voice. It could not have known my daughter's voice, but it was near it. It was in the neighborhood of it. It was a 4-year-old girl calling for her father, and it was close enough. It was almost... And I put my hands over my ears like a child myself, and Willard put his big arm around me and held my head against his chest so I would not do anything, and I have never told anybody that either. That a 70-year-old man had to be held like a baby on the floor of a fire tower so he would not open the trapdoor and go down the stairs toward a voice, because that is what it wanted. I understand that now. It never tried the bolt. It never broke the glass, and it could have... It walked the catwalk all night on the other side of a 1/4 inch of old glass, and it never so much as tapped it. It did not want to come in. It wanted one of us to come out. Come alone. Hurry. Come, Daddy. Every single thing it did, all night. Every voice, every stolen sentence, every trick. It was all one thing. It was all an open door, an invitation. And Roy's voice was in my head the whole time. Calling a name is an invitation, and I finally understood that the whole trap was built out of our own wanting. It could not make us open the door. It could only make us want to, so badly, want to go to the child, want to save the girl, want the nightmare to be a thing we could fix by being brave. And it would stand out there in the dark and be as pitiful and as human and as almost right as it needed to be for as long as it took, all night, all week, forever, because it had forever, and we had until dawn, or until one of us broke. There was a stretch, I could not tell you how long, where it went quiet and did not talk and did not walk, and that was worse than the walking. When it was moving on the catwalk, you knew where it was. When it went quiet, you did not, and your ears reached out into the dark for it and found the little sounds a tower makes and turned every one of them into a footstep. The tick of the cold steel became a foot on the stair. The catch of the wind in the guy wires became a hand on the glass. Willard had a watch with a glowing face, and I made him turn it against his wrist, because the little green light of it in that black cab felt like a candle in a window, like something you were showing them. We sat in the dark and did the math that men do, which is to say we did not talk about the thing at all. We talked in whispers about the road down, about whether Willard's truck would start, about how many hours to gray, and Cordero, to his credit, tried twice more to raise the trailhead on the radio, and both times it gave him back our own voices, spliced, patient, and both times he turned it down a little further, until it was just a low hiss we could pretend was the wind. I thought about Carol. I want to put that down, because it is the thing that kept me on that floor. Grant had a child's voice pulling at him, and I understood it. I understood the pull of it in my own chest, the animal need to go to a thing that is crying. It is the oldest wiring there is, and the thing out there knew it and was playing us on it like a fiddle. But I had 34 years of Carol, and every time the pull came up in me, every time my legs wanted to stand and my hand wanted the bolt, I put my mind on her back under my hand in our bed, the exact real weight of her. And I thought, that is real and this is not. that breathes and this does not, and you do not trade the one for the other. And I held on to her like a man holds a fence post in a flood. I have never told her that she is the reason I came down off that mountain. I do not have the words for it. That would not scare her. But she is. Grant broke a little, around what I think was 3 a.m, though time had come apart by then and I could not swear to it. The voice had settled outside the north window into Dana Reyes's voice. We all knew it was hers now from her outgoing voicemail that Cordero had played for us that first day. "Hi, you've reached Dana." And it used that, Hi, it's Dana. I'm hurt. I'm so cold. Please, I've been calling all night. Why won't you come?" And Grant started to get up. He just started to stand, his face wet, saying, we can't. She's right there." And Willard took him by the belt and the collar and put him back down on the floor without a word, and held him there. And Grant cried into his own knees, and the thing outside the glass said, in Dana's voice, so soft, so reasonable, "Why won't you come?" And then it laughed. It should not have laughed. That was its one mistake, if a thing like that makes mistakes. It laughed in Dana's voice, a girl's laugh, and it was almost right. It had the pitch and the shape of a laugh, but there was no breath under it. A laugh is made of breath, and this had no breath in it. It was the idea of a laugh performed by something that had never needed to breathe, and it went 3 seconds and stopped dead. No tail on it, no fade, just off, and then it did it again, the exact same 3 seconds, and again, the same, a laugh on a loop, and whatever spell of pity it had been building in us broke on that mechanical little laugh, and even Grant stopped crying and went still, because you cannot pity a thing once you hear the machine in it. It had held the mask on all night, and it dropped it for 1 second to laugh at us, and behind the mask there was nothing. There was just the same 3 seconds over and over. And that nothing was the truest thing I saw or heard all night. And it is the thing I have left. It is the thing that lives behind my eyes now, not a monster, a loop, a laugh with no breath in it, going around and around forever. After that, it seemed to know it had lost us, or maybe it just grew bored, if that is a thing it can be. It stopped talking. It walked the catwalk a while longer, slower, and then it went down, and we felt it go down the outside of the legs, the whole tower shivering with its weight, and then the cinders below took its feet. That soft slap going away, and then even that was gone, and there was just the tick of the cold steel and the 4 of us breathing and the great wheel of the stars going over, and none of us moved, and none of us slept, and none of us said one word for hours, until the glass in the east windows started to go gray. When there was enough light to see the ground, we looked. All around the base of the tower, in the red cinders, there were prints. The long, bare human kind, and the cloven deer kind, and in places one turning into the other mid-stride the way I had seen on the road, and they went around and around the tower in a circle, hundreds of them. A whole night of pacing worn into the cinders, and at the bottom of the stairs, on the first 3 steel treads, there was mud. It had stood on the stairs and left mud, and the mud was still wet in the cold morning, and pressed into it, on the 3rd tread, plain as day, was one clear print, and it was not a foot, and it was not a hoof. It was a hand, a long-fingered hand with too many joints in the fingers, pressed flat into the mud where it had steadied itself, reaching up, and the thumb was on the wrong side. We went down when the sun was full up over the far rim and warm on the glass, and not 1 minute before. We went down the stairs, stepping over the mud, without touching it, and we got in the one truck that would start, Willard's, because Cordero's Tahoe had a dead battery, and every door standing open though we had left it locked, and we drove down that bad cinder road too fast, and we came off the mountain onto Forest Road 250, and down to the pavement of Highway 97, where the world was the world, gas station lights, and a cattle truck going north. And Cordero pulled over onto the shoulder and got out and was sick in the borrow ditch, and none of us said anything about it. They found Dana Reyes 11 days later. A grouse hunter's dog turned her up, off trail, down in the bottom of the far drainage below the lookout, a long way from where anybody would walk. What was left of her was not right, and I will not put down here what the hunter said or what the state medical examiner wrote, because it does not help anybody, and because some of it I do not believe, and some of it I believe too much. They ruled it a cougar that had, they said, cache the body and return to it, which cougars do, and that accounted for the condition, and that accounted for the scattering. And it went down as case 8391, animal predation, cause of death undetermined, and the file is closed, and I am sure the young medical examiner in Bend sleeps fine. I will tell you the one thing about it that is mine to tell. When they recovered her, she still had one boot on, the left one, laced up, double knotted, on her foot, and the right one, the one that matched the boot, I found tied and alone and set out neat in the middle of that clearing 4 miles away. That boot was never found. I know because I asked, I badgered Cordero about it until he stopped taking my calls, where is the other boot, and the answer was they only ever found the one I found, sitting laced in the dust in the middle of a clearing that our body never came within 4 miles of, with a ring of bare prints around it that walked in from nowhere and walked out to nowhere, and no coroner and no cougar and no closed case has ever once explained to me how the boot she was wearing when she died came off, her foot still tied, and got itself carried 4 miles and set down gentle as a shoe in a store window before we ever started looking for her. Roy Bittner never went back up. He turned in his SAR card that fall, and he did not give a reason, and nobody who had been up there asked him for one. He and I had a beer once that winter at the tavern in Prineville, and we did not talk about it. We talked about the beavers and his grandkids, and only at the end, out in the parking lot in the cold, Roy said one thing. He said, "Don't go looking into it. Don't read about it. Don't try to learn what it is. Don't say its name. Don't give it your attention, because attention is a door too." He said his grandmother told him, "You do not study it, and you do not chase it, and you do not even hate it too hard, because all of those are ways of knocking on the same door. You just live clean, and you keep your distance, and you do not answer when it calls." Then he shook my hand, and his hand was cold and dry and steady, steadier than mine, and he got in his truck, and I never saw Roy Bittner alive again. He went in his sleep the next March, 71 years old, and I have chosen to believe that a man who kept his distance, that carefully got to go the ordinary way in his own bed, and that this is a thing you can earn. I quit the search and rescue. My knee, I told them. The knee is real. The knee is genuinely shot, but the knee is not why. I turned in my card the same as Roy, and I have not been up past the pavement since. I do not go into the mountains. My wife thinks it is the knee, and I let her think it, and that is the only lie I tell her, and I tell it every year when the elk tags come out and the boys ask me up, and I say the knee, and I stay home. Here is how I know it is not over, and then I am done, because there is nothing after this. There is no lesson in it, and no comfort, and I am not writing it for either of those. Grant, the young one from Deschutes, he stuck it out on the job a while, and then about a year on, he transferred back to the coast, and about a year after that, his people got a call, and it was Grant's voice on the phone calling his mother at 2 a.m, from a number that, when they checked it later, had been disconnected for years. And Grant on the phone said, "Help, Mom. I'm hurt. I'm so cold. Come get me. Come alone." And Grant's mother, who did not know one thing about any of this, who only knew her son's voice at 2 a.m. saying he was hurt and cold and needed her. Grant's mother got in her car in her nightgown and drove out toward where the call seemed to come from, out a Forest Service road she had no reason to know, and she made it about 6 miles up before the road got too bad, and something ran across her headlights that she said later to the deputies. She said it went across on 4 legs, and then it was standing up on the far side on 2, and she stopped the car, and it stood in her headlights looking back at her, and it had her son's face, and she put the car in reverse, and she did not stop until she hit pavement. Grant was fine. Grant was asleep in his own bed on the coast the whole time. He never made any call. His phone never dialed his mother. It just used his voice the better part of 2 years after that night 150 miles from that mountain to try to walk his mother alone up a dark road, and I do not think it was trying for her. I think it was still trying for one of us, one of the four who did not come out the trap door when it called, and it will keep the voices, and it will keep trying, patient as a boot set out in the dust, patient as a laugh that does not need to breathe, and it has forever, and we do not. So here is the end of it, the only end there is. I sleep with the hall light on, which my wife thinks is for getting up to the bathroom, and I let her think that too. I keep my phone in the kitchen at night now, across the house, on silent, face down, because twice in 5 years it has lit up at 2 in the morning with a number that is no number, no name, just a string of digits, too long to be a phone. And I have not answered it, and I will not answer it. And in the morning there is nothing in the call log, no missed call, no voicemail, nothing, as though it never rang. And I lie there in my bed with the hall light on, and I listen to it buzz once, far off in the kitchen, and then stop, and I do not get up. I put my hand flat on my wife's back so I can feel her breathe, real breath, in and out, the thing it never once got right, and I wait for the gray to come up in the window, and I do not answer, and I do not answer, and I do not answer.